with all of your knowledge right now, if it were me, I'm 22 years old. Hey, Brian, man, I'm really interested in being a firefighter. What would you say to me?
It's not easy when you reach a certain age. So I would say get fit and try to get some exposure to it, because take everything that you do now and then try to doing it wearing 100 pounds of stuff.
Welcome back, everybody. Episode 17 today. We're going to be talking to Brian. He is a firefighter, and he's been a firefighter for a very long time, and he's had a very interesting path, and we're going to talk about all of that. And if you've ever wanted to be a firefighter when you were younger, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear about that. And if you have any questions for Brian that we don't talk about today, let me know in the comments as well, and I'll ask him and I'll respond to your comments. But Brian, thanks for coming today. I really appreciate you being here. How are you?
Yeah, good. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Let's just start with where you grew up. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up around here. I grew up in the town of Oracle, there north of town here. And I was there most of my childhood. I was actually born in Phoenix, and then I spent the first year of my life. My father worked for the mines in Samuel. So most of my childhood was spent on that side of the mountain. Came back, and then I grew up there, came to Tucson for high school, and then I've basically been here ever since, other than some stints, journeying around the world, I guess you could say. But yeah, as an adult, I've been here my whole life.
You like Arizona, I take it?
I do, yeah. I'm an outdoorsy person, and there's a great mix in this state of things that you can do outside. So,
have you ever pondered living anywhere else? And if so, where would that be?
I did. I tried, actually, for a little bit to move up to the Pacific Northwest. I was offered a position with the city of Tacoma Fire Department, and I almost moved up there because of a girl, and then that didn't work out, so I'm still here. So.
Tacoma, is this Washington?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Had you ever been there before?
I had. I mean, with her family and things. That was about a 5-year relationship, so I mean, we were fairly ingrained in each other's lives. Yeah. But yeah, I was about ready to uproot everything and head up there. So.
What did you think of Washington compared to Arizona?
It's beautiful. I love the outdoors.
I hear a however coming.
Well, I mean, the older you get, the more you kind of get enmeshed in community and politics and things like that. Okay. And it's a very different place to live than Arizona, that's for sure.
Yeah, so I can imagine.
Yeah. I mean, the west side of Washington is incredibly different than the east side. I don't know how familiar you are with it, but it's like two different states.
Are you serious?
Oh, yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. So the state, you could draw a line in the middle, and it's like a very polar opposites.
Very much so. In fact, I think that they've actually attempted a few times in the last 30 years or so to enact legislation to create two different states.
I did not know that.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's just say the left side of the state is left and the right side of the state is right. But yeah.
That says everything.
Yeah.
That's pretty funny. I didn't know that there was we're going to divide the state in half. Yeah. Did they have names for the sides?
They probably do, but I never got that into it.
That's so funny. Yeah. Did it ever get close?
I don't know. Probably not, because the majority of the people live over in the Seattle area, and so I would imagine their voter base is probably much larger. But yeah,
that is funny, man. I've never heard of that.
It's a fun battle.
So as a kid, what were you into? Were you like, oh man, I want to be a firefighter for when you're 5? You know what I mean? Or what were you into when you were really little?
Dinosaurs, trucks, space. I don't know. Yeah, I wanted to be an astronaut when I was a kid. It wasn't really something that stuck with me. Yeah. To tell you the truth, I never really had those stereotypical childhood dreams of being a firefighter or a police officer or something crazy like that, or even the military. I just was a kid. I spent a lot of time outside. I grew up, my grandmother lived on a small ranch. I just spent tons of time outside doing outdoorsy things. Never really got too into computers and all that. In fact, it's pretty funny. Even in high school, I didn't really know how to use computers that well.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, of course, they weren't really a thing as much back then.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, no, I never really had any aspirations to do anything with my life until high school.
Did you have a Commodore 64 or anything like that, or an Apple, whatever they called that back then? Macintosh. That's what
Macintosh. Yeah. At school, but no, not at home.
So Macintosh was for the rich kids.
Yeah.
And then Commodore was well, you can't have a Macintosh yet, but you know what I mean? But you still had like a computer. And I remember playing this like Bruce Lee game and like thinking about it, like it was like these just like pixels, but it would like run and you could push this button, it would kick and I loved that game.
Oh yeah. I mean, Nintendo was starting to become a thing. We had the Atari when I was young. I remember that. Yeah, the Macintosh. Yeah, with what was it? The Oregon Trail was the game. Yeah, that was popular when I was a kid. So I came into existence right around the sweet spot for the time of technological advances in entertainment for children. So,
all right. So, if you could go back to life pre-cell phone, would you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Me too.
Yeah, I mean, high school was so different. People actually had to talk to each other and look at each other.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I saw this on YouTube. There was this like video that some guy posted, and it was like a 90s high school. It was like a real video. It was like the first day of whatever year it was. Mm-hmm. And like all of the comments are like, no cell phones. You know, everybody's like, you know, just whatever the word is I'm looking for, you know what I mean? Connecting with each other.
Sure.
I was like, man, you know, it's totally true because you go anywhere today and you just look around and it's people doing that, you know, the whole time. And I would love to go back to life without the cell phone and email.
Yeah. I didn't even want a cell phone when I was in school. I didn't even get one until I was probably, had to have been 20 or 21 years old. And the only reason I got one is because I ran out of gas on the highway one night when I was like 2 a.m. and I had to spend the night in my car on the side of the road because nobody was going to stop for me. So, yeah.
I was like one of my first jobs was I was a bagger at the commissary down in Fort Huachuca, and there was this guy, and I can't remember his name. I think it was Maurice or something like that. But he had a cell phone, but it was one of those like little bags, you know, and it was like a small briefcase, and then it had the little thing that would come out and everything. And we were like, oh man, you know what I mean? But it's like, it's crazy, like to think back to that was like wow, and looking at it like, you know, then it goes to like the brick phone, then the flip phone, and then the Razor and BlackBerry, and now where we're at is like insane.
And now things are getting big again because they have TV screens. So yeah,
I saw the price tag of one of the iPhones, and I was like, dude, this is just getting ridiculous. This is insane.
Yeah, my work iPhone is still an iPhone 6 because
that's funny.
I don't need it for anything else. So,
yeah. So throughout, like, at what point did you start to become interested in being a firefighter?
As a teenager, I think I was right around 14 years old. I was interested in the things that most boys are at that age, especially where I'm from. Running around on my dirt bike, three-wheeler, quads, things like that, hanging out with my friends, girls. And I had a couple friends who had joined the Junior Fire Explorer program. Mm-hmm. And that was something that isn't really around these days, but at the time, most departments were doing it. And it was just a way to get youth involved and kind of, I guess you could say, start grooming kids to become firefighters, exposing them to it, seeing what their strengths and weaknesses were, things like that. And in Oracle, things were, I guess you could call them kind of cowboyish. I mean, they almost used us when we became teenagers at the age of about 16 because we could drive as firefighters.
Wow.
I know. And you look at it now and you just think back to how unsafe it was. But yeah, I mean, it was a small town. It was a volunteer-based department. And, you know, you got to do what you got to do with what you have to work with. And it was fun. I was having a good time. I still didn't really take it seriously as a career until about a year into it. A kid that I'd grown up with, his name was Andy Primero. He passed away in a house fire, and it was actually right up the street from my house. But that experience kind of made me look at it as more of a profession and less as something to do for fun, and just think about what could have gone differently, how things could have changed. Now, there weren't any mistakes made during that incident or something negative that made me want to change things, right?
Sure.
It was just more of an experience that kind of opened my eyes and said, oh, if I was there, I might have been able to make a difference, right? Yeah. So I started taking it a little more seriously and getting more involved with it. And then when I turned 16, like I said, the department kind of started using us a little differently.
Yeah.
And at that point, I was starting to get pressure from my parents about what do I want to do with my life, a career, making money, and things like that. And I just started realizing that, oh, this is something that I could actually do and make a living. So I just started doing the training and taking classes, and as much as I could do for being underage at the time.
Yeah.
Back then, the qualifications to become just a base level firefighter, entry level position type thing were really not that high. I mean, essentially you needed to complete a fire academy and become certified in whatever state you worked in. And in Arizona, you could do that at a community college. You can just go for one semester through a fire academy. It's like a part-time thing. You go a couple nights a week, all day on Saturday, and then you can take a state certification exam, and you get certified. And then you also have to have a medical component. And the problem when you're underage is you cannot do that due to HIPAA laws, like personal privacy stuff. They can't have anybody that's not 18 yet interacting with patients. So that had to wait until later. But I did as much as I could. My senior year of high school, I actually aligned my schedule so that I could get all of my schooling done by 10:30 in the morning. I would work full time, and then I would go to Pima in the evenings.
So I want to go back to the Junior Explorer program because I think that's really important for a lot of reasons. One, because like that was probably a big part of your inspiration for becoming a firefighter, but also as parents, it can be difficult to try to find that place where your child can find, an inspiration, whatever that might be. It's not that you're trying to like, hey, go do this. I want you to be a firefighter, but it's like kind of like, where can they get exposure? Like, where can a parent try to get exposure for their child to maybe try something that they might like, whether it be baseball or, like for my son, it was Civil Air Patrol. You know what I mean? That's like how many people have heard of Civil Air Patrol? You know what I mean? That's like very few people have heard about that. But even the Junior Explorer program for firefighters, I know that the Border Patrol has one. I didn't know that, a lot of fire departments probably have that. So what did you think of that as a teenager?
As a teenager, I found it a lot of fun. Like I said, when I first got into it, it wasn't really something I was taking seriously until I had some things happen to me. And at the time, if I'm being completely honest, looking back on it, the reason that they probably did away with the program is for some of the things I already described, right? You've got a lot of smaller agencies and things that tend to use those kids, for lack of a better term, right, as adults. Yeah. But to reference, what you asked me, it was great exposure to something different. And there were police explorer programs at the time, too. Yeah. Nowadays, they have what they call the JTED program, which I couldn't honestly tell you what that stands for. I think it's like Joint Technical Education something, but it's an incredibly popular program that's offered at most of the high schools, at least around this area. I don't know how widespread it is, but they have all sorts of programs that are amazing. I mean, we host part of their fire division at our operations center, and they come, and it's kind of like what I described as far as a community college goes. These kids can come and they learn. They get to experience a fire academy type setting, a couple nights a week, Saturdays, every other Saturday or something, and they just get to see what it's all about. They get to wear the stuff, throw it on. Legally, they're not allowed to run calls because, again, there's a lot of privacy issues. But they get to do some pretty neat stuff, especially as a kid. And it really exposes them to, if this is something that, A, they think that they could handle physically, because as you can imagine, it's kind of a physical job. And then B, just mentally. Academies can be tough. The training involves a lot of pushing you to your limits and just kind of putting you in stressful situations. And it is fun, and a lot of kids do it kind of for the same reasons that I did. Their friends are doing it and they just think it's neat, something like that. But they have programs for everything. I mean, it's insane. There's so much more out there these days than there was when I was a teenager.
That's good to know. So that's here locally in Tucson, JTED. I know I've heard of that. And so that's good for parents to know. But, the other thing is just kind of like, you kind of have to like do some research. You kind of have to look for these options out there that exist for some type of summer program. I know I've heard of summer programs for, different like careers that, over the summer they want, like to offer something for kids because there's not a lot to do, you know what I mean? And that's good to know, man. And then, so moving on to the fire academy, when you were going through that, like, I remember you said it was a semester, like at one of the community colleges. Is that pretty typical, like for it to be a semester long to do something like that?
If you're doing it in that setting, yes, it's fairly similar for all public service. Like fire departments, again, you can go through a 1 semester part-time fire academy and get your certification. The same thing in Arizona, you can do what they call POST, which is police officer certification training. They can do that too, and I believe that's also only 1 semester. Most of your agencies, once they hire you, you have to go through a fire academy all over again.
Okay.
The fire service is really only in the last 5 years kind of come around to the idea of lateral movement, if you will. I mean, man, for 10 to 15 years or so, it's hard. It's still hard in some of your larger organizations, your big city municipalities. If I were to leave where I'm at right now in my career and I were to head over next door to Texas and go to work for whatever, the city of Houston, I would literally have to start over as a baseline firefighter and go through a year of probation.
Wow.
Yeah. And go to the fire academy all over again.
So then you could go to a local community college and get a certification. What is that certification?
In Arizona, what that is that's a certification that's meets a national standard. And there's 2-3 different national standards that your state has the option of adopting or meeting. And what that does is it gives you that. And the biggest thing is the exposure. Now, again, anywhere that you go to work is going to make you go through another academy. And there are multiple reasons for that. The biggest being you need to learn local procedures and local things, right? As opposed to just a national standard. And then it's also just the practice with specific gear and equipment type things. But what that does is that gives you a piece of paper that says you have met a national standard.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is the certification called, if you remember?
In Arizona, we meet something called the IFSAC accreditation, which is the International Fire Service Association Accreditation Congress. Okay. And that is the smaller of the 2. The other big one is called Pro Board, and that one is based out of Texas, and it's just the other version of a national certification. That one kind of took off because the military adopted that as their standard. And so obviously the military is everywhere, and that became the larger of the 2.
So you can have this and apply to a fire department, but they're likely going to put you through their own academy. So is it true to say that it's not necessary to have the certification?
It is not necessary to get hired. It's more of a how do I get a leg up on the competition type thing.
So it would be helpful
very much
to have that. Okay, so that makes sense. But regardless, it will help you get hired onto a department. But if you get hired onto a department, you're going to have to go through a separate academy that's department specific.
Correct. Yeah. Most departments these days, recruitment has gotten a lot harder in the last 20 years. And most departments these days are now doing a full, what we call a green academy. So if you take somebody with 0 experience off the street and you just give it all to them, and that's every certification they're going to need, every bit of training, everything. Now, again, if they were to hire somebody like me, as an example, I still have to go through all of it, but at the end, I wouldn't have to take the certification or the licensure exam because I already have it.
Okay.
Yeah, but I still have to go through all the training with everybody else.
How long is a typical academy nowadays, after you get hired onto a department?
So there's 2 big things that you need in order to work. The first one is the fire academy, which is what we've been discussing. The second thing is some sort of an emergency medical services certification or licensure, depending on state you're in. In Arizona, it's a certification, and that has to be either as an EMT basic, so an emergency medical technician, or as a paramedic.
Oh, okay, so I didn't realize that. So you need to be an EMT or a paramedic to become a firefighter.
Correct. Yeah,
because those aren't easy to get.
They're not. Yeah, to become an EMT, that is only 1 semester at community college, but then you have to pass a national certification exam, which most states, as long as you take the program in their state, it will also meet that state's requirements. But medical services are kind of just like anything else. If you're working in a hospital, whether you have a license or a cert, which basically means you have the ability to act on your own or you have to work underneath somebody else.
Okay.
It's, there's a lot of legalities that go behind it, and there's a lot of specific training. And it's not easy to become a paramedic. Is significantly more difficult than to become an EMT. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember a friend of mine, she got through and she, was an EMT, but then to become a paramedic was just a lot more school, a lot more time, way more difficult. You know what I mean? So, but you could do it with either. You could become an EMT first, get your, go through an academy with a department if you get hired on, and then you would be able to be a firefighter. Is that, would that be the right way to say that?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of, stop me if you think I'm going off on too much of a tangent here, but a lot of the career pathways, if you will, for people that are trying to become firefighters is trying to decide whether they want to be an EMT or a paramedic. Because in Arizona, they're two very different jobs. And you can go through and become an EMT, and you can go to work for a private ambulance company with just that.
Okay.
So if you just have the one semester of community college, like AMR here in Tucson will scoop you up, and they will put you in an ambulance. You won't necessarily be running a lot of 911 calls, but you'll be getting experience, and you'll be working with fire departments and doing all these different things. And what that gives a lot of people is the opportunity to get that exposure and decide if they'd rather focus on fire or if they would also like to become a paramedic in addition to being fire.
Yeah.
My youngest sister is actually going through this process right now. She got her EMT. She wants to be a firefighter. She went to work for AMR in Phoenix and is going through that. In Phoenix, there are a lot of municipalities that do just EMS as its own division. And she wanted to go to work for one of them. So now she's going through paramedic school.
Wow.
And when that process is over, she's basically going to have to make the decision whether she wants to just do EMS or if she also wants to do fire. But it's a great way to get your foot in the door and get that practice and that experience. That's one of the biggest hurdles that new employees have to face is sometimes not necessarily knowing whether or not they're really prepared to deal with some of those things.
Yeah.
And doing that beforehand, set you up for success.
You've been a firefighter for how long now?
It's really all I've done my entire adult life, other than some small things. But where I'm at now, I've been working there since, 2007?
Okay, so you've been doing this for, 18-ish years?
Yeah.
So I know I'm kind of I'm getting a little ahead, but I want to ask it now because we're talking about it. With all of your knowledge right now, if it were me, I'm 22 years old. Hey, Brian, man, I'm really interested in being a firefighter. What would you say to me?
Well, I know you outside of this podcast, so I know you work out plenty, but it's not easy when you reach a certain age. So I would say get fit and try to get some exposure to it because take everything that you do now and then try to doing it wearing 100 pounds of stuff with a supplied breathing air as opposed to just being able to breathe the ambient air around you. If you can do that and you don't get squeamish, give it a go.
And then when you decide to give it a go, like what path would you choose? You know what I mean? Would it be get the certification at the college, go apply to a fire department? Would it be get your EMT, get on an ambulance, get a little bit of exposure, see if you want to go the medical route or the fire route? You know what I mean? Like I never realized that this was so, because all of this, any one of those decisions could have a big impact on what direction you really end up going.
Yeah, absolutely. My best advice for somebody that is maybe looking at a career change or wants to do it later in life would be just start applying first. The biggest hurdle is trying to get through the competition. And so much of it is based off of the interview that developing those skills is what's going to set you up for success. Because to be honest with you, the chances of getting hired the first time you apply, very low.
Okay.
Unless you know somebody or you're a legacy hire type situation, right? Which is technically illegal, but it happens. It's then start doing the training at the same time to make yourself a stronger candidate and to get that exposure and that experience. I would probably recommend doing the EMT thing before fire just to get that exposure and then that practice, that experience, and that knowledge base to understand if that's really for you. Because if I'm being honest, it's probably 80% of what we do.
Does every firehouse have a gym in it? I know most of them do, but like, is it pretty much every one of them?
Pretty much.
And it's for a reason now, because what you just said.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, this is really cool because I didn't realize there were quite a few paths that you can take to get to a very similar destination. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So let's go back now. You got your certification, right? Mm-hmm. And then what happens after that?
What can happen or what happened to me?
What happened to you? Let's talk about yours because it's, I mean, we talked about it a little bit beforehand and it's super interesting. And I love to hear about it, but I want other people to hear about it too because there's so much that you can learn from a person's experience. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, so my senior year of high school, I started going through the fire academy there right before graduation. And no. Let me back that up. My senior year is EMT school.
Okay.
And I was not 18 yet. And so I could not take the exam until there are certain requirements that have to be met in order to take that exam. And I couldn't meet those requirements until after I graduated because I didn't turn 18 until June, graduated in May.
Oh, wow.
So I knocked all that out and then pretty much immediately got picked up into a fire academy through, I guess it was Central Arizona College at the time, which is like the community college for Pinal County.
Yeah.
And I started doing that. And because I was no longer in high school, I was trying to make money during the summer. And so I was just doing concrete, framing, whatever odds and ends jobs. Mm-hmm. I grew up around ranching, but there's really not any money in that.
Unless you own like 1,000 cattle or something.
Pretty much, yeah. But as just a hired hand. Yeah. But yeah. And so I was doing that. And then I had not gotten hired yet. I had started applying at places, but the competition was fierce. I mean, I was literally fighting for 80 positions with 3,000 other people. Mm-hmm. And while I was going through that process and getting that practice and that experience, trying to become a stronger candidate, I actually got a scholarship to go to the University of Arizona for mechanical engineering.
Wow.
I was always, I guess you could use the term smart. Like school came easy to me in high school, but I was not very good at applying myself.
Yeah.
Right. So, and because school came easy to me, it probably developed a little sense of, I guess you could say, entitlement or something where like, oh, I don't have to try that hard. Right.
Yeah.
And so I started college without really, I guess, anticipating what that was going to mean to me. And then I realized very quickly that I did not like it. You can imagine how my parents felt about that.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, especially when you're like, hey, I'm going to be an engineer. And
a lot of math. Right.
Yeah.
And so I stopped doing that, which didn't put me on the best terms with my parents. But almost immediately I got picked up by Rural Metro Fire Department for one of their academies. Again, now I'm going through an academy for the second time. Right. And I went through that, and then I started that process of finishing the academy and going to work. And very soon after that, it couldn't have been more than 3 months. I had somebody, one of my previous academy instructors, contact me who, to be honest with you, I don't even know what his affiliation was, but he knew somebody that worked for Wackenhut Fire Services, which was one of a million subcontractors of Halliburton. Uh-huh. And he said, hey, we've got a private military contract gig and we're looking for people. So if you go back to that point in history, makes us feel old, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
What happened in 2001? 9/11.
Yeah.
That was obviously a big deal for somebody that was doing firefighting type stuff, things of that nature. Not to diminish anybody's losses that day, but I mean, we lost 343 people just with the fire department in New York. And when you think about that for a second, the city of Tucson, I mean, they have about 550 firefighters working for their entire agency.
Yeah.
And so could you imagine losing 343 of them in one instant?
No.
I mean, right? Now, granted, New York's significantly larger than Tucson, but just the effect that had on me at the time and the country, everybody wanted to be a firefighter. The competition was crazy. Mm-hmm. Then in 2003, we invaded Iraq, trying to chase down, the people that were responsible for that attack. Patriotism was at like an all-time high.
Oh yeah, I remember. Man.
Yeah. And everybody wanted to be in the military. Everybody wanted to be a firefighter. Everybody wanted to do these things that nowadays aren't as popular. And so we're making this big push, and what we were doing was basically moving into the country, dismantling their government, and then reassembling it, helping them rebuild. And part of that process was a long-term occupation. And in doing so, we had to develop a lot of infrastructure to support that. And part of the infrastructure is emergency services.
Yeah.
And so a lot of that got contracted out. At the time, the military wasn't doing a lot of its own firefighting, only the Air Force. And that's because it was very specific to aircraft and rescue, those types of things. And so they would contract out. Well, to circle back around, one of these agencies that was doing a lot of that contracting, which was basically the primary entity at the time, they were just pulling people left and right. And so I had not been adequately prepared for what I was getting myself into. Let's just start there. Without going into too many details, but basically what happened is he said, "Hey, are you interested in this?" I was just a kid, and I said, "Oh, I don't know. Like, do I want to go to war?" And then he told me how much I'd be getting paid. And I was 19. So I said, "Where do I sign?" And he said, "Well, slow down. Let's see how this process works." So he literally gave me a phone number, and I called this phone number, and I spoke with what you would call a recruiter. And she said, "Well, this is what we're doing. We're providing these emergency services, but we're still entering the country. We've only sent one group of people so far. Wow. And if you do this, you're committing to, I can't even promise you what, because we're setting things up. We're in the infancy stages."
Yeah.
And I said, "Sure, sign me up. I don't care." So she schedules me an interview and sends me, a stack this big of paperwork to sign and read through and stuff, right? And so I'm 19, so what do? I'm not reading any of that, right? I'm just signing papers. A week later, I have a teleconference interview with somebody from Washington, D.C., somebody from the company headquarters down in Florida, somebody fairly local. And they're asking me a lot of questions. They're asking me what my experiences are, how I think I could prepare for this. They're telling me, like, "Look, you're not going to be sleeping in, 5-star accommodations." I'm like, "Well, I camp, I ranch, I do all these things. I'm a hunter. I've grown up hunting my whole life. I think I'll be all right." And they're like, "Well," it's not like they're asking me, "Hey, are you used to getting shot and blown up?" But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I'm only 19. There's no way they're going to offer me this job, right? And so they say, "Okay," and then we get ready to hang up, and then I think they thought I hung up because they were still on the phone. And so I'm just eavesdropping at this point, and they're like, "Yeah, no, he's great. Let's give him the job." And I'm just like, "Oh, man." So then it like starts to set in.
That's
right?
like real now.
Yeah, and so I'm thinking, what is this? What does this mean? How am I going to tell my parents all this stuff? And they called me back probably 10 minutes after I hung up the phone. They offered me the job. They said that there was a lot of paperwork I had to sign. They overnighted it to me, so I had it the next day. I signed all this stuff, and my ship out date was a week and a half after that.
That's crazy.
So that's the kind of timeline we're looking at here, right? I get tempted as a 19-year-old with 6-figure salaries,
and then less than 2 weeks later,
I'm on a plane.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So my parents went from, like, "Oh, our kid wants to do this job that could kill him, but whatever, we're proud of him," to, "Oh my God, he's going to college," to "He's not going to college," to now he's decided to make a conscious decision to go to the Middle East at a time when things were not very stable over there, without proper military training or anything really. And I'm leaving.
And you're 19 at this time?
19, yeah.
Wow.
So the actual job that they hired me for was firefighting and emergency medical response that was secondary to whatever the military was providing at the time. So that depended really on where I was. And I get over there, and the first place I was at was kind of a hot spot, and the emergency medical services that were being provided by the military were getting overran probably 3 times a day.
Wow.
And so that almost became my primary function. I didn't really fight a lot of fires while I was there at that first location, and I was there for probably 6 months. And at that time, really all I did was almost more just like medical response type stuff. Then they started shipping me around as we got more people. And because I was there for literally a matter of months before some other people, I was considered senior. And so they sent me around and we started setting things up. And I was all over that country. I did a lot of different things based on where I was at. But eventually my job kind of morphed more into firefighting. And that was pretty neat because I got a lot of exposure to people from all over the world.
Yeah.
All different countries. Not to mention on the truck, I could be working with somebody from whatever part of the United States.
Yeah.
And I really started developing a passion for it when they added more stuff to my plate and said, hey, now we need you to start training the Iraqi Civil Defense Corps. At that time, part of what we were doing, again, was reestablishing their infrastructure, which was their emergency services as well. So it was literally us training their people to be firefighters. And then I realized that I kind of had a passion for teaching. I had started getting into all sorts of different things at the time, and some of my interest became in what we call technical rescue, which is just the really fancy extra ways that we can rescue people beyond just that I'm going to go into a burning building and pull somebody out type stuff. And that was really where I developed the passion for all this and how kind of my desire to come back and do it as a career here in the United States began.
That's a pretty incredible opportunity, like literally out of the blue. And then to go do something like that at that age. And I just can't even imagine what that experience would be like. I mean, looking back, you know what I mean? Like, well, how would you even categorize that opportunity?
Oh, it's so tough. It's one of those things where you look back on it and you really regret some of the decisions you made. But you also look back and think about how the experiences kind of made you who you are and things that you did at that time that you would have never done in your life otherwise.
Yeah, I can't imagine that ever. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I had never been out of Arizona. Until I got on that plane, and I'd never been to a big city, really. I mean, Phoenix is a big city, but they don't have like New York, right? Like skyscrapers and things like that. And I got to Houston, and you want to know what kind of baseline training they gave us before I actually stepped foot in Iraq? That would be 1 week in the city of Houston, which really primarily consisted of a lot of HR stuff. Then they put me on a plane, and then I spent a few months over in the Middle East in the UAE, the United Arab Emirates. And we got a little more training there, but that was kind of like weapons specific and things that you'd be dealing with in a war zone. But that was a big city, Dubai. And that was my first time ever being in a big city. And now I'm in the Muslim culture.
Wow.
Just growing up, a small town kid from Arizona. And
how long were you there for?
I was probably there for close to 3 months before I finally went over into Iraq.
So when you first go to overseas with this opportunity we just talked about there, you're about there for 6 months?
Like in Iraq?
Yeah.
The first base I was at, I was there for about 6 months. In total, I was there for, I don't know, a year and a half.
When do you come back to the States, and what do you do?
So we had 2 periods of furlough in a 12-month period, and it was designed to be every 4 months.
Okay.
And at 19, really I didn't have a lot of big hopes and dreams. I didn't even know what I wanted. I got over there without a lot of preparation, like I described, and I got these guys around me that are setting up these elaborate vacations, and they're going to all these different parts of the world. And I took my first furlough and just came back home. I just wanted to hang out with my friends. And I came home, and then things took a bit of a different perspective for me. As you can imagine, some of the stuff that I was dealing with over there kind of changed me.
Sure.
And my personality. And I came home and realized that a lot of the little things about life, especially as a teenager, weren't really important to me anymore and didn't really concern me in any way. And then I was okay. So then I went back, and my next furlough, I went to Australia. Like, just like, hey, I want to set up some crazy thing, right? Again, just these things that happen to you. And kind of, I know I'm going off on some tangents here, but to circle back to your original question, like those experiences and how they changed me and whatnot. But it's tough to describe how different life was back then, because at that age, I didn't have any life experience. And I go over there and I start getting exposed to all these things. I go home for my first furlough, and it was so unorganized. All the people that are listening to this that work for the military are just going to cringe, exposing some secrets. But I come back and I get to Dubai, and they were not prepared for me at all. They had no idea I was even coming back. And so I get off the plane, and it's just a civilian aircraft. And I'm at the airport, literally just the city of Dubai airport, and I have no idea what to do. The first time around, I was with a group of people, right? And they were saying, hey, you come over here, and this is what we need you to do, and lead me around by the hand. This time I get off the plane, and I'm literally just a passenger, and there's nobody waiting for me. So I go to where I went before, because that's what was familiar with me, but it had all changed. We were no longer there. We didn't have, a presence there at the airport like we had my first time through. And so I just hopped a cab over to where I was staying the first time through. We weren't there anymore either. So now I'm just, in a different culture, a kid with no life experience who doesn't speak the language.
Pocket full of money.
Yeah, pocket full of money, driving around. Eventually, I find some guys wearing military uniforms, and I'm like, hey, where are you guys based out of? And they tell me, so I drive over there now. And I'm like, hey, I'm trying to get back into Iraq. Where do I need to go? And they're like, well, we're about to go. You can just come with us. And I'm like, okay, let's do this. So I hop on a plane with some people that I'd never met before. Dude, and this is a military aircraft, right? And they land over at like the city of Baghdad airport, which is in the middle of not a good place to be at the time. And so I get off the plane there. And again, there's nobody waiting for me because they didn't even know I was there. And those guys are like, all right, well, we got you here. See you later. And I go through customs. They take half my stuff because they tell me I'm not allowed to have it, but they're putting it in their own pockets. And I get out of the airport, and I'm like, all right. So again, I find some more people, and I say, hey, I'm trying to get over to Camp Victory because I knew it was close, and I knew we had a presence there. And so they're like, all right, we'll give you a ride. Come on. And they literally give me a ride. And at the time, you could not get onto a military installation in that country without going through quite a process. I mean, car bombs were like a daily thing. Bad things happening at ports of entry. And I get to the gate, and they're like, who are you? I'm like, oh, I got my ID here. I work for, I'm a subcontractor through Halliburton. And they say, oh, okay, you're good. Wow. And I get in there, and then I go check in at basically like what you would call like an HR type facility at the time. And they're like, oh, we didn't have you on the schedule to be back for like 3 more days. Well, you're good. You're checked in. So I just find my way back over to this group of people, and then they ended up getting me where I needed to go. But I literally had to find all that out on my own.
Dude, that is crazy.
I could only imagine what would have happened if I would have put myself in a bad situation in the middle of that, right, at any point. But you want to talk about enlightening experiences.
Yeah.
It definitely changed who I was as a person and my thought processes and just the way that I approached basically all of my decision making from that point forward. So things that happen, there's a lot of bad things that happen to me over there. But again, stuff like that, some of the trainings that I got, the relationships that I'd fostered and developed, the things that I was exposed to that made positive differences in my life, definitely outweighed the negative. Mm-hmm. It was dangerous, and I had a lot of things happen. I really consider myself lucky to still be here, but it shaped who I was. And then when I came home, it definitely, I want to say, probably gave me a leg up on competition for getting hired to do firefighting as a career civilian world.
So you're setting up, you're over there, you're help the locals set up some type of infrastructure to be able to do their own firefighting. Mm-hmm. Once you're done there, you come back to the States, then where do you go after that? Like, are you still going into firefighting at that point, or?
That was my goal. I initially went to work for the state of Arizona doing wildland firefighting. It was the first job that I could get in the firefighting world.
Was it like on a hotshot crew or something? Or
yes and no. So I started working for a private contractor. His name was John Rhodes, and he used to be the fire chief of Mount Lemmon Fire, and he created his own. He started his own private wildland firefighting agency, right? Mm-hmm. Wildland firefighting has always been very different than working on a truck that's going to respond here if you were to call 911 right now. Mm-hmm. And that's just because those incidents are so large. The government pools resources from all over the country when that happens. So right now we have that huge fire going on outside of LA, right? That's just chewing everything up. They've got resources from everywhere. The city of Tucson, locally, we've probably sent, I want to say 30 trucks. I don't know, somewhere close to 90, 100 people over there. And so you can do that privately. You can do it working for a public agency. As long as you've got a truck and you meet minimum qualifications, you can get a contract with your state or with the feds, and you can go out on these incidents. So this is what he did. He picked me up. That's a relationship that I had fostered as a junior fire explorer working in Oracle. And I started doing that. Then I went to work literally for the state of Arizona on just a brush truck. Mm-hmm. And then I ended up working as what we call a squatty, which is just literally the lowest level of supervisor that you can attain with one of the prison crews off of Wilmot. Mm-hmm. And I did that for a couple seasons. That was only a seasonal thing. It was not a full-time job. And so while I was doing that, I was testing for all these different departments. Okay. And I was just putting in applications and interviewing and doing that whole process.
I'm a little bit familiar with the wildland stuff because I worked for a shower company that was on one of the national contracts, and we would do like big fires and stuff like that. And we were on that rodeo Chetasky fire years ago. Yeah. And I remember working like 20-hour days. You know what I mean? It was just nonstop, just running a shower. It was me and the guy that owned it. He was running water and I was running the showers, and it was insane. But like when you were talking about like earlier, just like waste. I mean, everything and anything you ever needed in any amount that you wanted was there for you. Yeah. And the national caterers, you know, like that was one of the really cool things was like you could eat whatever you wanted to eat all day long. It was all like top quality stuff. But I just remember asking somebody for batteries, and I needed like 2, and they were just take the whole box. That was the mentality because they didn't want to go home with it. You know what I mean? They wanted to get rid of it all. Mm-hmm. And it was just insane. I mean, just walls of Gatorade, 4 or 5 feet high, at least 100 feet long. You know what I mean? Just insane. I was like, wow, it was just unbelievable at that level. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that. That was actually the very first, what we call a campaign fire that I was ever on.
Really?
Yeah, I was 18 at the time. I had my certification, but that was the first incident that I was called to, was that rodeo Chetasky fire. And it's probably something that you could even speak to. I don't know where you were actually at, but I remember rolling into the city of Sholo, and it was like 2:00 in the afternoon, and it was dark outside. Yeah, from the clouds.
Yeah.
From the ash and everything.
Being on those fires is really strange because like in the day, there's a hue to the way everything looks, and it's just so different. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like, wow. Yeah. And it was very unusual. Yeah. It was a cool experience. You know what I mean? Like sure. I don't even remember how I ended up doing that, but it was just so random. And there's another like random thing I did was the inside of a water tender. Mm-hmm. It was non-potable, but it needed to be potable. So the inside of that thing had to be clean, and it was not a small one. It was a big one. And it took me all day. And I was like, man, I've never done anything like that. And I hope I never have to do anything like it. It was insane. It just scrubbing the inside of this thing. And then, you know, he had to treat it with like water and bleach and all this other stuff. But I would say that's probably the oddest job I ever had, was cleaning the inside of a non-potable water truck that needed to be a potable water truck.
Yeah, that's funny. That is random. That is random. Yeah. So, I mean, to continue the conversation, that's so I did that while I was testing around. Gained a lot more experience and a lot more connections, and eventually I got picked up by, well, actually, let me backtrack a little bit. I also wanted to make myself a stronger candidate because, again, I was hiring and I wasn't getting hired. So I went through paramedic school.
Before you get into paramedic school, let me ask you something, because it's something you said that I think is very important. The experience of interviewing. Mm-hmm. Because like you were saying earlier, it's like nobody wants to be rejected, but you're going to get rejected. Mm-hmm. And you have to look at these opportunities, in my mind, almost as like these are your opportunity to get better at a lot of things. One of them is interviewing, because you have to be able to be good at an interview. Mm. What do you think about that?
It's tough. My biggest hurdle was the interview. I mean, for anybody, right? So if I describe to you how, I was competing with thousands of people for jobs. Yeah. What sets you apart? Is it showing up and being well dressed? No.
Yeah.
Is it doing well on the written test? No. Mm-hmm. Is it going and passing the standard for the physical agility requirements? No. It's when you go in and you sit down in front of that panel of people and you sell yourself.
Yeah.
That's what sets you apart, because that's where they see you. That's how you carry yourself.
Yeah.
How you speak, how eloquent are you? Are you able to look people in the eyes, speak with confidence, and just be the type of person that projects the image they're looking for?
Yeah.
And it's hard to know what that is until you do it. And again, like I said, to go through that process with no experience and get hired your first try is
pretty tough,
astronomically difficult. And it's not until you do it that you start to learn. And the hardest part for people, especially if you're young like that, like 18, is looking at that and taking that rejection and realizing that you need to learn from it versus getting defeated by it.
And that's what the point that I wanted to make for anybody that's in any field, really, like looking to get a job or a different job or become a firefighter, is like, look at each one of those interviews as an opportunity for you to learn for the next one, if you do have a next one, which is very likely, because you know the first one's not very likely not going to be your only one. So it's like you got to put yourself out there, and you've got to be able to accept that it's not necessarily rejection. You know what I mean? Yeah. But it's going to feel like that. But that process of interviewing and, well, what can I learn from that? What did I do wrong? What can I do better the next time? And then 10 interviews down the road, it's like, oh. You know what I mean? Like you start to learn things. Because I recently interviewed for this job, and I had to go through 6 interviews for this one job. And it was interesting because I had never done that before. But each one, I was like, oh man, like I learned something. And then I would apply it to the next one. And then it was like, oh, I'd go to the next one. I'd be like, oh, that was something a little bit different there. I'm going to use that for the next one.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it was really an interesting process to go through multiple interviews and learn something from each one. And it kind of seems like this would be very similar in the sense that, like, embrace this opportunity to do these interviews, because you're going to get to that one where you're going to make it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I still remember my very first interview, and I showed up not having any idea what to expect, and I was nervous, and I probably had a cold, wet handshake when I shook everybody's hands. And
it's all clammy and everything.
Yeah, and I got through it, and I blanked out half of it. Right?
Yeah,
they're asking me questions, they're doing all this, and then I think back to it, and I'm just like, man, like, no wonder they didn't hire me. Like, look at the image I projected, right? Just some scared child, like trying to get a job. But just the feelings of the rejection, because up until that point, I hadn't really failed anything in my life. Yeah. Right. Like I said, school came easy to me. Every job that I ever had was not careers, but they were jobs, and it wasn't like they were hard to get. I go do an interview and then I get the job. And so I get that letter saying, sorry, but you didn't meet our standards or our qualifications. And I just remember thinking, like, wow, like wow. Right. And so then I started analyzing it, and I realized that at the time I didn't really think of it this way, but looking back on it, it takes a certain amount of emotional intelligence to be able to, I guess, read the room.
Yeah, for sure.
And, you get in there and you look at that panel of people sitting there.
It's very intimidating.
It's intimidating. And you think, what are they looking for? Like, each person might be a different person with different life experiences and all these things. But then I started looking for the common themes, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, when I call 911 and that truck shows up, what would I be looking for as a person? What do I want to show up at the door to take care of me and my family? And well, that's what I need to project.
Yeah. What
I want to see. And then when I started looking at the people giving these interviews, sitting at the table, it was like, okay, you know, that's what I need to be, because that's what they're looking for.
Sure.
And so I started changing what needed to be changed. Again, just the mannerisms, the posture, the handshakes, the eye contact, the things that they were doing. And that was when I started doing a lot better. And I started scoring really well in these processes. But even that's not enough, or at least it wasn't back then.
Yeah.
And that's why I was doing all these extra things, trying to gain experience, trying to go through more schooling, get more certifications. I mean, by the time I got hired full time, I feel like my portfolio was already bigger than half the people that was, you know.
Yeah.
It was insane, some of the requirements that needed to be met back then. But yeah, it was learning that experience, the fear of the rejection, just overcoming that and literally looking at everything as an opportunity.
When you're doing the wildland fires, how long did you do that for?
I did it off and on. As my primary job, I only did it for 3 seasons. But once I went to work for some agencies, because I also peppered in some experiences with smaller fire departments throughout this whole thing. And I would do it for them a lot just because I had the experience and I didn't mind it. And as a young guy with no family and no children, it was a lot easier.
Yeah.
So in total, I probably did that for around 7 seasons or so.
And then what do you do after that?
By then, I was already working for Rural Metro, where I work now, and I basically just started focusing on other parts of my career. I just left the wildland division, and that was when I really started getting into the technical rescue division, which is where a majority of my career has been spent. But
is technical rescue, is that like saving somebody from they fell in like a cave or something like that, or like rappelling and like those types of skills? Or
yeah, there's 5 main disciplines, rope rescue being the largest one. Which could really be anything from an urban industrial setting to the outside, wilderness, mountainous type stuff. Again, that's the largest discipline. There's a few others. We have confined space, which is, I mean, when people hear that term, they think of just small spaces, but it's also kind of just literally spaces that are confined from the outside world, right? So this room could be a confined space if it was sealed off and there was something hazardous in here. Then there's emergency building shoring or like structural collapse type incidents. And then trench collapse.
Oh, wow.
Which those two are very similar disciplines. A lot of those standards have been set by like the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And it's just building things. And then the last one around here anyway is swiftwater rescue.
What does that mean, swiftwater rescue?
So you've got still water, which would be like a swimming pool or a pond. Swift water would be
like rivers or something.
Yeah, a quick moving body of water.
Got it.
And around here we have monsoon storms, which lead to flooding, which is a whole another level of swiftness, right? Yeah, because those, I mean, that's very unpredictable. It's very chaotic, and it's not even anything like a river. So we get a lot of those types of incidents.
You probably know this, but like, it's something like every time the speed doubles of water, the power quadruples or something like that. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's something insane. Where it's like, the power of water is just, I mean, you look at any of these like tsunami videos from that big tsunami and it's like literally the water was carrying all of the buildings off, ripping them off the foundation and just everything gone. Insane.
Yeah, the biggest issue we face locally is people trying to drive around road closure signs.
Oh man, I can only imagine.
Yeah, and then in their vehicle, they just get into a bad situation because they just have a false sense of security having a big, heavy car. Most of your passenger cars weigh 3,000, 3,500 pounds, and so they think that that's safe, when in reality, That's not a lot of weight.
Yeah.
And the only thing in your vehicle that actually contacts the ground is about a 6 square inch chunk of rubber times 4. Right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't take much to break that contact, and you will float away. That's not a good situation to be in.
So when you are doing these, you're doing technical rescues with rural, and you've been there for how long?
Since 2007. So we're looking at what, 17 years? 18.
Progression wise, like when you started at rural metro, you know what I mean? Like what would be like a typical progression? Because right now you're a battalion chief.
Correct.
And what does that mean? And like, how do you end up getting up to that point?
So my current position is battalion chief. I am a operations chief. So I am not part of administration, which means in every fire department you have operations and administration. It's broken down into 2 different things. And operations is literally the people that you see out on the streets. So administration would be the people in the office. The technical term for administration is, they develop and enforce codes and procedures. So you've got your fire chief and your assistant chiefs and logistics and all these other things. That would be administration. What I do is, as the battalion chief, I am assigned to A shift. And in my department, what that means is that essentially the whole operation is mine when I'm on duty. So we have 3 different shifts. We only have 5 stations with 6 companies, a company being a truck, the truck that you see driving down the road. And it's my job to manage/supervise. So I'm literally responsible for all the boring stuff, scheduling, HR, discipline, like all those types of management functions. But then operationally, I have to respond to every large incident, every technical incident, everything. And it's my position is to be in command of that incident, depending on the complexity of it. So sometimes I'll run just your average call, even if it's just like a 911 call for an emergency medical response if I'm close. But for the most part, I only respond to the larger incidents.
I had a question I was going to think of, and I like totally spaced it because like as you're talking, like I'm listening to what you're saying, I'm thinking about like other things. This probably sounds like a dumb question, but are most fire departments, they're running 24 hours, right? And there's all these different shifts going because we want to be able to provide these emergency services at any time of the day.
Yes.
What are the typical shifts, and how does that work like per week, like as a firefighter? You know what I mean? Like there's 3 shifts you can be on, and if you're on shift 1, shift 2, or shift 3, this is what your week will look like.
In Arizona, we mostly run 24-hour shifts, and it's the actual alignment of those shifts or how that all plays out kind of just depends on where you work. But in the Tucson area, pretty much everybody is on what we call a 3-4 schedule, which is you work 24 hours on, then you are off for 24 hours until you've worked a total of 3 shifts.
Okay.
And then you get 4 days off.
Wow.
And it just rotates around. There are other versions of that around, but that's the most popular one around here. What that plays out to is an average of 56 hours a week.
Okay. How do you, what is it like to work a 24-hour shift?
Wow, that's a loaded question. It totally depends on where you're working. So we've got some stations that are in newer neighborhoods where there's not a lot of fires. We've got stations in retirement communities where you've got a lot of elderly people who tend to call 911 for medical reasons a lot more often.
Okay.
You've got stations that are in industrial areas, lower socioeconomic status areas where you've got a lot more people in a smaller space, and we get a lot more fires because of that in those areas. I've spent a majority of my career at one station just because of the technical rescue thing, and it's a fairly busy / average station. I would say it's not uncommon to run about 15 calls in a 24-hour period.
During the 24 hours, so what would be an example, for if you're on a 24-hour shift, how many in the station that you're at, how many people are on that shift with you? Is it 5, 6?
Well, again, it kind of just depends on where you're at. But I mean, an average firehouse has one company in it and either an ambulance or some sort of auxiliary equipment. So if you've got 4 individuals on a fire truck and then 2 individuals on an ambulance, and then 1 to 2 people on whatever other truck might be there, those water tenders, utility trucks, things of that nature, rehab vehicles, you're looking at around 7 to 8 people.
And then of those 7 to 8 people that are on that 24-hour shift, is there like time where you get to sleep and like, you know, like, hey, 3 people get to sleep, everybody else is up, and then you like rotate the sleep? Like, is it like you have to be up the whole time, or you're just on call the whole time for that shift?
Yeah, when you're on duty, you are expected to be available for incidents. The SOGs vary depending on where you work, but basically we have things that we have to accomplish, and we try to squeeze all that in an 8 to 5 type setting.
Okay.
So we go out, we do things with the public, we do public education, we do inspections, we do all these different things. We have to maintain hydrants, we have to inspect sprinkler systems, suppression systems, all these different things. We have to train, we have to do X amount of training per day, we have to do X amount of physical PT, physical training a day, and we have to sprinkle that in with the calls. So at all times, you know, you're not necessarily getting everything done, but we try to get all of that into the 8 to 5 type time frame.
Okay.
We have to eat meals together. We have to be around each other constantly because you've got to be to the truck.
Yeah.
As soon as the call comes in. And then after 5, it's kind of you time, right? So depending on the dynamics of the crew and the group of people that are working together, that's when they do, you know, things together like you would do at home, where you would hang out, watch TV, mess around, play games. You know, a lot of stations have like a pickleball court or a basketball court or something set up.
Nice.
Barbecue. Most of your crews around will do a big elaborate dinner together, but the other meals will kind of just be together but individual, where it's just what you bring into work type situation.
And then what does like the workout time look like? Is it kind of like when you want, like as long as, you know, nothing else is going on type thing, or?
Basically, I mean, the supervisor for the crew, which would be the captain, they kind of set the tone in the schedule, and they sort of lay it out for everybody first thing in the morning. Like, hey, these are the things we have to get done. This is when I'd like to get them done. Let's squeeze in our workout at whatever, right after lunch or right before lunch type thing.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. And is it like a certain amount of time? Like, hey, we got an hour and a half, hour, or?
Yeah. Usually, I mean, the SOG says it has to be at least 30 minutes. It's just different for everybody, right? I mean, there's a lot of people that work out insane amounts outside of work, and then when they're at work, they don't really work out that much.
Okay.
There's people who only work out when they're at work because they get made to. Yeah. There's people that, you know, and everything in between. So, but yeah, for me, most of my career, I mean, I've made a commitment to work out at least once a shift, and that's varied so many ways over the years.
Yeah. What is SOG?
30 minutes.
What's SOG?
Oh, sorry. The standard operating guideline.
Okay.
Which
I was wondering.
Yeah. So we work under what we call SOGs and SOPs, and guidelines are called guidelines because they're not set in stone, right? It's just a guideline. These are the ways that we need to do things.
Got it.
But it's not always possible.
Something that I was thinking about as you were saying something is, and I haven't really thought of this before, but you know, like, somebody makes a 911 call. Hey, there's been an accident. A lot of times an ambulance and a fire truck shows up. Are there typically ambulances in the fire stations as well?
Yes and no. It totally depends on what part of the country you're in. Around here, most of the ambulances are housed within a fire station. Yeah.
Okay. And what determines, I mean, this sounds like an obvious question, but I want to be very specific. Like, because I've seen, you know, the fire truck show up when it might not necessarily need to show up, but like what determines whether an ambulance and a fire truck goes?
Around here, you're going to get a fire truck every time you call 911.
Okay.
And that's because there are a lot more of them out on the streets than there are ambulances, and they can get to you faster.
Okay.
So if right now one of us was having a medical emergency and we needed to call 911, you're going to get the closest ambulance and the closest fire truck.
And that's why I'm asking this, because I see a lot of fire trucks a lot of times where I'm like, oh, that's weird. Like, I wonder why the fire truck's here. You know what I mean? But this is like that. So this is kind of like one of those situations where it's like you're just going to get one, which is a good thing. But is that part of the reason too that you want to be an EMT or a paramedic, one or the other, on a fire crew?
Yep. You cannot do one without doing the other.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you are on a fire truck, you're going to be running EMS calls. You're not just going to be running fire calls.
Is that specific in Arizona? I mean, I'm sure there's other departments that do it like that in other states, but Arizona, that's how it works.
That's the predominant way that it's done around most of the country. There are some agencies, and some of them are pretty big, where they still do one or the other.
Oh, okay.
But for the most part, it's not separate. It's one and the same, and that is kind of born from, I guess you could call it job justification, right? Because it's not cheap to run a public service agency, and people pay a lot of money in taxes. They pay a lot of money into that system, and to be able to justify existence, like, well, yeah, we need to be able to provide these services. And so, like I said, there's a lot more fire trucks than there are ambulances, and so kind of honing in that specialty really since the 70s of saying, well, I mean, we're here to, our primary function in this profession is to save lives, essentially.
Yeah.
And so that's not just something that we do on fires, right? It's also something that we can do medically. Yeah.
Going back to the work schedule, the 24 hours on, 24 hours off until you accumulate 3 days, and you get 4 days off, and you're going through that rotation. You know, a lot of people talk about work-life balance. Like, what is it like to try to have that on that type of schedule?
It can be difficult depending on what stage you are in life, especially if you are into doing extra things like those wildland deployments and stuff, because with those, you have the potential of being gone for up to 2 weeks. But I mean, just your average regular schedule of working those 10 shifts a month, those 24-hour periods, it can be a lot. It can make, you know, relationships difficult. It can make having a family difficult because you're away from your kids, and then you've got issues like childcare. If you've got a two income household where you and your spouse are both working, right? So then you've got a lot to contend with. It's not the easiest, but it's just kind of the nature of the beast. There's not really a different form of schedule unless you go into the administrative world.
Yeah, and it's kind of one of those things where it's like, regardless of the situation, you always end up figuring it out somehow, and that's just how it works.
Yeah.
You know, it might not be the optimal scenario, what you wanted it to be, but you make it work somehow. Yeah,
you do take a lot of things, I guess you could say, for granted, or things become normalized to you that aren't necessarily normal to other people.
Sure.
I mean, it's really all I've done most of my adult life, and to be honest, it was funny because when I started making friends outside of my work environment, and, you know, you've got holidays come up. And they say, hey, you know, this is what I'm doing this weekend for Christmas with my family. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, I got to work Christmas. So we're actually doing Christmas this week on this day. And to me, that's normal. That's something I've done my entire life. Sure. But other people are like, you can't do Christmas not on Christmas. What do you mean?
Yeah.
What are your kids going to say about that? Well, what do you mean? Like, they're my kid. Like, we do this every year. That's all my kids know too. Early. Yeah. So there are allowances that have to be made, and just things that are outside, I guess, what you would call normal. But like you said, you make do.
How do you like that type of work schedule? I mean, it seems very interesting to have like a day on, day off, day on, day off, and then you get 3, then you get 4 days off. But it's that 24-hour shift. I've never, you know, really experienced anything. I've worked 20-hour days, but it was for like a couple weeks. You know what I mean?
Yeah. If it's a slow day, it's nice. If it's a busy day, I mean, you spend that whole day off recovering. I've had some interesting shifts over the years where we've had very large scale incidents like junkyard fires, things that last literally several days at a time, and you're just working. And that's tough. I spent a few years on an ambulance early in my career, and it was a busy truck. I mean, I'd run 20 calls in a shift. And you don't sleep.
Yeah.
And that makes the next day hard. It makes those in-between days hard. You spend the first day of your 4 days off recovering, so you really only end up with a couple days off in that whole 9-day period.
What do you like about being a firefighter?
That's changed so much over the years.
In what way?
When you're young and you're getting into it and you're excited, it's just like, I want to fight fire. I want to help people, right? That whole cliche of I'm here to help people.
Sure.
And you live for that stuff. You live for the bells to go off and to get out there and just get dirty and disgusting. And you're doing this hard manual labor. And it's like the culmination of all your training and your practice and your preparation into that 10 minutes of terror. And then it's, you get that elation from doing that. And then there's the cleanup afterwards and all that. And you feel like you made a difference because that's why you're there.
Mm-hmm.
And then later I got into it a little bit more with medical stuff. And it's like you have that call where you actually helped somebody. Like you truly saved them because of your interventions.
Yeah.
And so you start to live for that. And then I kind of started steering my career towards the technical rescue stuff. And you get that hiker that's way up in the mountains and they fall and then they're in the middle of nowhere and you got to be brought in on a helicopter. Mm-hmm. And like if they were there for another 10 hours, they'd probably be dead just from exposure.
Yeah.
Right. And you help that person, or the rock climber stuck on the side of the mountain who just gets stung by a swarm of bees. Oof. Right. And so like you start doing things and your interests and your focus and what you steer towards really starts changing. Mm-hmm. And at least for me, the things that I have looked forward to also have changed depending on my position.
What did you look forward to early on and what do you look forward to now?
So early on, it was literally just fighting fires, right? I was just a young guy that was, used to working with his hands and doing manual labor, and I just wanted to fight fire. That's what excited me. Nowadays, it's really kind of morphed into teaching and seeing.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and like seeing the younger generations succeed.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, that's what gives me the satisfaction now.
What's one of the hardest things to deal with as a firefighter?
Well, striking that home life balance with work. Mm-hmm. If you're at a station where you're dealing with a lot of, that busyness and maybe you're in a part of town where you're seeing some not so great things, it's really hard to not take that home.
Sure.
And then all it takes is one bad thing to happen and you're not in the best headspace, right? And so trying to balance that with home relationships, now with being a parent, with all these other things, that's probably the hardest. Yeah, it's just trying to navigate that and still be a good person, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the scariest thing you've ever done as a firefighter?
That's
like, was there a moment where you're like, dude, I don't know if I'm going to make this? Like, something bad could really happen right now.
Yeah, I've had a few of those over the years. I mean, some of the big ones that just come to mind, in the wildland world, again, you're dealing with these massive fires, right? And you always hear these horror stories about large groups of people getting trapped or having to deploy what we call the fire shelter, stuff like that.
Yeah.
I was on an incident actually very close to where the Yarnell Hill incident happened.
Yeah.
And we were with a very large group of people. I mean, we're talking, I had probably 6 hand crews of 20 people each and 5 or 6 engines down in there. There's a large group of people, a couple hundred people. And it was really only a one way in, one way out type situation. And there was a very large smoke plume. And to just give a little background on these incidents, when they become that big, they actually generate their own weather systems.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And this plume came up and something will happen where we call it a plume collapse, where air pressure will change. The plume will actually get so high in elevation that, you've got different layers of weather to simplify it. And the conditions were just right. Things happen and this plume just laid over on top of all these people.
Wow.
And the fire just ripped through us. And so I can still vividly picture, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it. Literally people just driving, people just hanging on to trucks, just screaming up this one dirt road, trying to get out of this bad situation. That one was not fun. That was scary.
How fast did this happen? Like, how do you notice it and how much time, like how fast can it escalate to where it's like, we got to get out of here?
We probably had a minute and a half.
Wow.
Yeah. We had spotters up on the hills that were talking about the weather changes and how we just had a sudden shift in wind. And then it was literally this person on this hill was talking to this person on this hill. They were seeing 2 different things. And before long, everybody was just looking up and you've been on some of those incidents, so you know what I'm talking about as far as the plume itself.
Oh, yeah.
And just picture that just laying over. And so that, again, happened in about a minute and a half.
And is the spotter essential for that?
Very much so.
Like, are you able, I mean, if you could notice it on the ground, I'm assuming if you could, it's too late. So you have to have spotter.
Yeah.
I see. This is interesting. I've never heard of this before.
Yeah.
So you have spotters at these big fires that are just specifically watching for these types of incidents. And then they're like radioing down, hey, this is happening. And then the person on the ground, oh yeah, I see this. And who's the one that makes the call? Like, hey, you got to get out of there.
At any time, it could be anybody. That's kind of the way the system has been successful, is really everybody has that authority. But there's obviously a chain of command and one person responsible for each chunk of an incident. Where we were at, we actually had such a large group of resources that there wasn't really one person responsible for all of us. It was just broken up geographically. And we didn't get a call to actually evacuate. It happened so quickly that everybody just realized we had to get out of there.
Wow.
Yeah.
How does that differ? So this is wildland, big, we're talking large areas. Like, how does that, is there something similar in like a structure fire? You know what I mean? Like house or big building or something like, and what would be the equal to that?
So about, I want to say 6 years ago now, I had one incident where at the time I was an engine captain there, and we were in it was just a one-story house down in the Sarita area, and it was kind of a bread and butter. The neighborhood was very much like this one where we're in now, where it's just a lot of stick and stucco homes, very close together, similar construction between you and your neighbor type thing.
Yeah.
And I call it bread and butter because those are the majority of the fires that we get, right?
Yeah.
It's usually a kitchen fire or a bedroom fire caused by something. And I don't want to say you develop a sense of complacency, but they're very similar to one another. And we came in and it was in the attic, and we thought we had knocked it out completely, but we had not. And one of the tactics that we do as we enter a residence like this is the first thing we do when we pop open the front door is we make a hole in your ceiling and we look to see if there's fire above us. Because if it's in the attic, we can't go any farther because we don't want it to come down behind us. And it wasn't there after we sprayed some water. So we moved forward, wasn't there. Somehow or another, it got behind us and the whole thing came down on us.
Wow.
And I, at the time, was more concerned about one of my guys because he took a pretty good hit from a Spanish tile to the head. And he was kind of out of it. So I had to get him out of there. And he ended up having a concussion. He was out of work for a little while, but for the most part, he was fine. It comes to find out, I didn't find out until actually fairly recently that I'd broken my neck.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But
how did you find that out?
Through a different injury where I got a random x-ray, and then the doctor that was doing the x-ray said, "Man, that's interesting. When did you break your neck?" And it turns out that when we looked at the stages of healing and the time frame and everything, and I was like, "Oh, that's why I had so much neck pain, and I had numbness and tingling, and I was just weird there for the next few weeks."
When was this?
That wasn't really that long ago. I mean, that was, I mean, just because we know each other outside of this setting.
Yeah.
If you remember when I was having the rib pain,
I do. Yeah.
that was that. Yeah. So that rib popping in and out, I was seeing a chiropractor, and then they started taking a bunch of x-rays.
Do you, were you able to attribute that happening to a certain event?
Yeah, it was definitely when that thing fell and hit my head.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
Man, that's crazy that you can just go through life and not know.
One of those things, I guess, right? Yeah, it was a compression fracture. So it wasn't like a shearing type thing. But yeah, I've got a lot of scar tissue and my cervical vertebrae between 5 and 7. There's a lot going on in there now.
Really?
Yeah.
What is it like impacting your day? I'm curious because I have some cervical stuff too. Like, are you dealing with any residual from that?
I'm really not anymore. The biggest issue was the issue I was having at the time where I developed arthritis above and below it. And the arthritis below it, where my rib came into my spine right there.
Yeah.
That's why it was loose. That arthritis had caused everything to loosen up. And so my rib kept popping out of place.
Which chiropractor were you going to?
I was going to, let's see, where was I going? Inspired Life with, I cannot remember.
Is that Q's?
Yeah.
Okay, I know who you're talking about. Yeah. John and his wife. His wife's the chiropractor?
Correct, yeah.
She good?
Yeah. I had been very skeptical up to that point in my life. But yeah, they sold me on it. Mm-hmm. They took really good care of me. So
yeah, so chiropractors, I mean, I've been to a variety of different ones for various reasons, but it's definitely been helpful for me as well. But it is kind of crazy that you find out after the fact it's already healed and everything like that. I mean, that's pretty insane. Requirements for being a firefighter. Do you need to have, like, aside from the certification, is there like any schooling requirement? Like, hey, you have to have a 2-year degree or anything like that?
You just have to have a high school degree. With most public service agencies, they have to make the jobs, at least at the entry level, available to anybody.
Okay.
Because it's a tax-based organization and it's a community-driven type thing. And so really the only requirement if you're working for an agency that's going to put you through all the training is just a high school diploma. And part of that process is it's about a 5-step process, and it starts with a written test. And most of that is just a general knowledge type thing. Literally, it's not even as difficult as the things that you would find on your SATs. You make it past that, they put you through a physical agility test. And for about 15 to 20 years, most departments around the country were using a standardized test. Everybody was using it, and that was called the Candidate Physical Abilities Test.
Okay.
And it was just a series of things designed to take you around 10 minutes or so. I think the pass-fail time was like 10 and a half minutes or something like that. It's been a while, but it started with you throwing on 60 pounds of weight and then hitting a stair stepper for a period of 3 minutes. And it was just a standardized rate. So it was like 1 step a second.
Okay.
And that was how they kept it, again, standardized.
Yeah.
And then you'd get off of that and you'd do some crawling. You'd hit a pressure plate with a sledgehammer. You'd throw up a ladder. You'd just do various things that would simulate firefighting tasks.
Yeah.
So you pass that. And you get through that, and then they put you through a panel interview, call an oral board interview with a group of people. And it totally depends on the organization. It could be people of all different ranks. It could be people of higher ranks. It could even just be people of lower ranks. And then if you make it through that, that will generally get you put on a list. And then that list is what they start pulling names from as the vacancies come up.
Okay.
And once they hit a certain number, usually around 20, depending on the size of the organization, they realize, okay, we can put on an academy now. So they'll call those people up. And then at that point, they have to go through a medical evaluation. That's different for everybody.
Okay.
Historically, you have to meet. So as we talk more, you hear me refer to an organization called the NFPA, which is the National Fire Protection Association. And what that is it started as just a small outfit out of Boston in literally like 1896 or something that was doing a suppression system. So they had literally created the sprinkler, right? And for a building.
Yeah.
And they, hey, look at this. We can put out a fire by pumping water through this thing, right? And it has morphed over time to the standard. They literally take people from all over the country, all over the world, and they put them together and they say, hey, we either have a standard for this, we need to create one, or we need to modify one. And they get all these subject matter experts together and they review standards, and then they change or create them. And these standards become the standard. And so most states or agencies will adopt these standards as their own. And it's everything from code enforcement to buildings to you name it, prevention to operations to whatever. I've even been involved in these committees in the technical rescue world. They create the standard for everything. So anyway, they've created a standard for medical entrance requirements. And it's really not that difficult. You just have to have a clean bill of health. You don't have to be like medication free. You don't have to, be a super soldier. It's just you can't have any cardiac issues, lung issues, Some things like diabetes are okay if it's managed.
What about vision?
Vision is one of them. You can be colorblind, and you can have, as long as your vision is able to be corrected.
Okay.
So if you have the ability to wear glasses, contacts, surgery, whatever it takes to have vision, I don't remember what the number is for the minimum requirement, but I mean, you have to be able to operate vehicles and equipment, and you have to be able to see, right?
Is there like somebody that's able to see, but their vision is impaired to the level that they're considered like blind, even though they can see? Like, you know, if you had a conversation with them, you would never know that they were legally blind.
Sure.
Is that something that's possible?
Again, it's based on that number, and I couldn't tell you what that is, but like saying, you know, like the average perfect vision is 20/20. You know, some people, they get it better 20/30, 20/40 with glasses or whatever. There's a number cut off there.
Okay.
And the reason there's a specific number is because, again, they're trying to standardize it across everything. But it's with correction. I mean, we have guys that could take their glasses off, and they probably couldn't even count the number of fingers on their own hand, right?
Yeah.
But when they're wearing their glasses, they can see fine.
Okay. That's good to know. You've been doing this for, I think it was about 17, 18 years now. And we just talked about you breaking your neck and not knowing about it. What other type of physical demands, like how demanding has it been? Like, you know what I mean? It's like football players, you know, and football players like, oh, I'm so beat up, you know, and they're 50, 60 years old and they're just like suffering, you know what I mean? Like, what has that been like for you? Like, have you been like, oh man, you know, it is really physically demanding over time and it's kind of beat me up? Or how do you feel about that?
Very much so. When I was younger and early in my career, I really didn't appreciate the things that I was doing to my body.
Yeah.
Again, I said, you know, I referenced how I used to live for the actual fighting fire. Man, I fell off a fire truck. I compressed L3 through 5. I just did so many things to myself. While in incidents, I had a brief bout of, you're probably gonna have to edit this out while I'm thinking. What's the common CrossFit injury? The pooling of the lactic acid, you mix your cells.
Oh, rhabdomyolysis.
Yeah, I had a very weak stint of rhabdo. I have cut myself. I've been just beat up, right? And when you're young, whatever, you feel invincible. The rehab time is very small, and then you start progressing through your career, and then you have other things happen. You know, you might get stuck in a bad situation with violence, something of that nature, and then it just builds up over time, right? But what you don't really see happening physically is the mental side of things and the resilience that you either are or are not developing. And waking up at any given moment and having to go from sleeping to physically running and then doing hard manual labor in a matter of minutes for years on end takes a toll as well. Your sleep habits, your mental resiliency, depending on your personality, just seeing bad things. Yeah. Or maybe not even bad things, but just dealing with death and literally just your average medical problems, right? Yeah. The longer that you're exposed to that, the harder it gets physically and mentally. I mean, and some stuff just circles around and you don't even realize it till later. Like we talked about my neck. We talk about all sorts of things. I had a situation where I had to deal with some domestic violence where a young child was being abused, and I had to deal with that for 7 years because I got sucked into the legal battle. Oh, wow. That came out over that. Jeez. Yeah. All of these things. So they stack up, but you learn to deal with it through the physical training. Yeah. And I'm not a very big person physically, and I'm sure that you look around and you see a lot of firefighters, and you know the stereotypical. You got your 6 foot tall guy that's probably 250 pounds of pure muscle, right? Yeah. And we do have a lot of those guys.
Yeah.
I'm not one of them. Right. So how do I make up for that? And it's just being in the best shape that I can be.
Yeah.
And that starts before you ever get hired. Because you've got to meet that requirement to just get your foot in the door. But the academy it's tough. They weed out a lot of people in the academy setting, and it's because they stress you mentally and then they stress you physically. Because there's a pretty big difference between working out a lot and working a lot.
Yeah.
Right. So I can work out really hard for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour. But you get to the academy and it's like, cool, we're going to do PT. So we work out for 45 minutes. Man, I'm exhausted. Well, that's nice. But now we're going to start working.
Yeah, totally.
Now you're going to put on your 100 pounds of stuff and you're going to drag this hose around. And if you don't do it the way I want you to, I'm going to yell at you.
Yeah.
And I'm going to make you feel horrible about yourself. And then when you feel like you can't do that anymore, I'm going to let you take your stuff off. And then I'm going to make you put it back on and do it again.
Yeah.
And we're going to do this day in and day out for months on end. Right. And that's not easy. And a lot of it is very difficult in the beginning because they want to figure out who wants to be there.
Yeah.
And who has prepared themselves enough and who can handle that psychologically. Because, you don't want those people to be around long term.
Yeah.
So if they're gone in the beginning, it allows you to start focusing your training and really start taking advantage of the people that you have left and making them as strong a candidate as you can.
Makes me kind of think of the wildland fire stuff, you're out there all day just digging fire lines and stuff like that. I mean, that's tough. That's hard work. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Especially in the summer. You know what I mean? It's hot. Yeah.
There's a reason I don't do it anymore.
Well, and that was one of the reasons. It was like they were giving high calorie meals.
Oh yeah,
every meal.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. The breakfasts were just loaded. The bags that they would give out were just loaded with calories. And at the end of the day, if you wanted an extra steak, you got it. They weren't like, oh, sorry, only one.
No,
you know what I mean. Yeah,
I remember some of those times in my career, man, you'd be out and they'd make you what we call spike out, which is you're out there and you're so far away from base camp that it becomes not worth it to drive back. So they make you just spend the night there. And so what they do is maybe with a helicopter, they'll drop off like a pallet that has a bunch of those sack lunches in it or something. Oh, yeah. So, or MREs, right? Yeah, you just get MREs and you'd do that for 2-3 days at a time. And then you'd finally be allowed to come back to base camp and you'd hit that cafeteria line. And it's something where, like, if you and I walked out right now and ate that, we'd be, okay. But you see that and you're just mouth watering. You consume 5,000 calories in 10 minutes because you're just ravenous.
Man, they would, the hotshot crews or all the crews that were out there would just come back and just wiped out. You know what I mean? But they were like, they loved it. They would be right next day. They would be back out there, man. It was pretty crazy, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
You sent us some pictures. You want to talk about those pictures?
Sure.
Yeah, let's we'll get those pulled up and we'll just talk about. So we got one up there right now. Is that says Royal Metro on the side?
It does. So that is a picture that we took on the very last day of my fire academy.
Really? So how long ago was that?
Well, that would have been probably January of 2008.
Wow.
I want to say, yeah.
Where are you at in there?
I am on the far right. My hand in my pocket.
Let's see. Hold on. Oh, I see. Yeah.
Yep.
With your leg kind of crossed over?
Yeah, that's me. Yeah. So we had started with, I want to say 24, and I think we ended up graduating 18.
Do they make you shave your head?
So they don't make you, but they do have requirements for hair.
Okay.
Not quite as stringent as the military per se, but you have to be clean cut.
Yeah.
OSHA says that you are not allowed to have any facial hair whatsoever because it interferes with the mask and the seal. Mm-hmm. So nobody is allowed to have facial hair. But
interesting. I didn't know that. That makes total sense.
Mm-hmm.
Where's this at?
So that is
this training or is this like the real?
This was a real incident.
Okay.
I believe I was a captain at the time. You can tell by the helmet there, it's got the red markings on it. And on my pack there, you'll see that it said E79. And so what that is that's the company I was assigned to.
Okay.
And that's just kind of just an action shot, just depicting, I guess you could say, some of the physical requirements of this, right? So it's a lot more than just fun. We have to tear all of that apart until the fire is completely out. You can imagine what happens if we just walk away from that, because we know nothing's going to happen.
Yeah.
But the first person that drives by it sees it's still smoking, and what do? They just call us right back.
And what are you looking for? Are you looking for smoke? Anything else?
Yeah. Once the fire hits this stage, there's a lot that goes into it, because then our investigation division comes out and they're looking for causes. Insurance is a huge thing. If this has been covering up a crime, you've got that whole side of things. So it's a fine balance for us between ensuring full extinguishment, not destroying any evidence that may be there. I mean, even something as morbid as looking for bodies or pets, things like that.
How heavy is that jacket?
So just the clothing weighs around 40 to 45 pounds. Yeah, that pack that's on my back weighs about another 30. You got the helmet, the mask, and then anything that you're carrying on your person, like your radio and then your personal tools. It ends up being around 100 pounds total.
So is the suit or like the jacket and the pants, I'm assuming there's Nomex involved in this?
There is, yes.
Is it all Nomex, or is it like...
It's mostly Nomex. You got a blend of natural fibers like cotton. They don't really use wool anymore. And then you've got stuff like Kevlar.
And then how are these rated? Is it like a time frame? Like if you're this close to the fire, you've got, you know what I mean? Like how is it rated?
So the NFPA, again, sets a lot of standards for safety and equipment ratings. And there's actually 3 different layers to that. So you've got an outer shell, which is designed to be like tear resistant. You've got a mid shell, which is designed to be like vapor resistant for bodily fluids and those kinds of things, and then also for liquids in general. And then you've got a thermal layer, which is designed to be just that, to keep you from the heat.
Okay.
I don't remember specifically what it is, but it's somewhere around 500 degrees for X amount of minutes.
And what is the typical fire heat? Like, I know it gets hotter as you get closer, but you know what I mean? Like if you're going into like that, like if that building's burning, and let's say that you're right there and the roof's on fire, like you feel like a certain amount of heat, like what would that be about?
On average, they say it's between 500 to 900 degrees. You're in there while you're working. If it gets into the 1,000-degree territory, it's not good. It's not very sustainable for long-term working. If you get any higher than that, things combust in a manner that's really not sustainable for life anymore at around 1,200 degrees. So one of the things that we look for when we're doing these is what we call flashover. And what that is when the ambient temperature in the given environment has reached the point where everything is off-gassing and capable of igniting. So to really like break it down, if this table was on fire right now, it's not the actual physical table that's on fire. It's that the table has gotten hot enough that materially it's breaking down, and it's actually off-gassing, and it's those gases that are on fire. So if everything in a room reaches a temperature where it's all doing that at once, it can be quite explosive. And that happens at about 1,200 degrees. And so if you're caught in that situation, you're not really wearing anything that's rated for that. And I mean, you might have 30 seconds.
Do you know, like if you're in a fire situation, like will the fabric start to smoke or something if it's getting too hot? Like, is there a way you can tell, like, well, I mean, you'll feel the heat, but like, is there something else that like an indicator that you're starting to see a little bit of smoke come off that thing? Or
yeah, you will physically start steaming.
Okay.
Your mask will actually start warping.
Oh, okay.
Depending on the type of helmet you're wearing, you will see it start to warp and melt.
So these are all like little cues that kind of give you like an idea, like if your adrenaline's going and you're like, okay, interesting.
Yeah, I mean, technology is always changing. It's very expensive still, but some of the newer things out there, the masks and whatnot will actually have indicators because they have temperature sensors on them. As an officer, so a captain or somebody that's holds a little bit of rank, we carry around stuff like thermal imaging equipment, which actually gives us a physical reading of the temperatures in there. And it's kind of like infrared. So we hold that thing up and it's just thermal based, and it's literally, blue is cold and red is hot. And when that thing goes all red, you should probably start considering alternative plans.
Very interesting, man. Yeah. So equipment wise, this is about 100 pounds you're wearing right now.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah. This is kind of a fun one for me. The reason I sent it to you is because you've got a little bit of history in this picture. So that building that's depicted there is actually the Triple T truck stop. So the Tucson truck terminal, the original building that they were in. So I don't know if you're familiar with the Triple T at all.
The one right off I-10?
Yeah. So that's off I-10, right? And it's been around since, I believe, 1958.
Wow.
And that is where it first opened.
Where's that at?
It's off Benson Highway. They're just north of Valencia. And so that what you're looking at is the freeway is literally on the other side of that big column of smoke.
Okay.
But what's neat about this building is when the Triple T moved out of it to where they are now, the Rural Metro Fire Department took it over and it became Station 71.
Oh, wow. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Is it still there?
It's still there.
Oh,
it's
wow.
no longer a fire station. It's now a mechanic shop.
Interesting.
But this was a very large fire that happened at a recycling plant.
What does the color of smoke tell you?
That there is a lot of stuff in there that's on fire. Again, so recycling plant, like you can imagine, it's, a lot of plastics and all these highly combustible things. When it's very thick and dark like that, it's not good. You've got a lot of things that could be creating a hazardous situation. I mean, smoke rating is almost like a whole topic of discussion on its own.
Yeah.
When it's lighter in color, it could be steam, it could be water. You could mean that we're actively extinguishing it. It's different colors mean different things. But for the most part, when it's thick and it's black like that, you've got a heavy volume of fire and a large condensed group of materials.
Interesting. Yeah, that's super cool. I love hearing about this stuff.
Yeah. This was just another large fire in a strip mall. And this was over off of Contractors Way, I believe. Again, on the south side. So kind of like in the Alvernon and Ajo area. This was one of the first larger incidents that I had after promoting to battalion chief. And I was actually off duty at the time. But I had gotten called in just due to the complexity of the situation.
So let's take this for an example. This fire starts and somebody notices it and immediately they call. The fire department arrives. This is what it looks like. How long does it take to put that out? On average. I know it's a tough question, but
most of the night.
Really?
Yeah. So in a commercial building, when we attack any fire, we look at it from what we call incident priorities. And for us, the very first one is life safety. And that doesn't just mean the people that were there to help. It also means ourselves.
Okay.
The second thing on that list is property conservation. And then the third thing is incident stabilization. So going down the list in that order, the very first thing we have to look at is there a potential for somebody to be inside? When you look at commercial occupancies like a strip mall, in the middle of the night at 2 o'clock in the morning, there's probably nobody there. So we have to look at it kind of pessimistically and say, is it really worth putting our people in there or not? Only then do we look at what we call property conservation, which is, like this is still stuff that we need to save. Just because there's not necessarily a person in there doesn't mean that a person's entire life isn't wrapped up in there.
Yeah.
So we'll do what we can. But if we show up to a commercial occupancy at 2 o'clock in the morning and we see a heavy volume of fire, we will probably make a quick sweep to make sure that there's nobody in there. But at something like this, we got to back out and take it slow, pour a lot of water on it from the outside. And in that type of situation, we're going to be there all night because we can't be inside directing the water to, the source of the fire.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So the one on the left there is just it's just a little brush fire, just a kind of another, again, an action shot, just depicting some of the stuff that we'll face on a regular basis. The picture on the right there is starting to get into the technical rescue specialties, and it's a training. So much of what we do with the technical rescue is training because it's so specialized.
Yeah.
That it's what I would definitely call a perishable skill.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And if it's not something that you practice on a regular basis, you're not going to be good at it when the time comes that you actually need to utilize those skills in a real world scenario. So this one was for confined space. So you'll see a lot of all that stuff on the ground is a combination of ropes, comm gear, air supply. Those two yellow things with a fan on the end is actually ventilation apparatus. You can't really see it because the people are in the way, but you can kind of see one leg of a tripod there above the guy that's bent over. And what it is there's an access point, and all of that stuff is going down into that hole. And you're seeing a whole operation here. So you've got a couple people that are working that edge, trying to help the person going down in there, helping to pull out any potential victim, manage all that stuff so it doesn't turn into a big mess of spaghetti and get somebody stuck.
I laugh because it's not funny, but I had, so when I was working those fires, the pilot light on one of the water heaters went out, and it was in a really tight spot on this because the showers are set up in a tractor trailer. And I had to like shimmy into this thing. I have no idea how I got in there, but when I got in there, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get out of this.
Yeah.
And I was like trying to light this. I mean, I'd never been in a situation like that before. I was like, man, this would be really scary. Like if you're by yourself and you're in a cave, this would be terrifying.
Yeah.
I mean, there's people all around me and stuff, so nothing's going to happen. Somebody's going to have to yank me out. But I'm like, I was able to get out, but it was just like, dude, like, I can't imagine like being in a situation where you could get stuck and literally be stuck for hours or days or whatever.
To me, it's terrifying. I mean, the last confined space incident that I had was a guy who was trying to get a dog out of a storm drain.
Oh, dude.
When I looked at the size of that opening, it was only maybe 14 inches. And this was not a small individual. I have no idea how he got in there, but he was wedged so far in there that there was no coming out. And it took us hours to get him out, but he got the dog out.
How'd you get him out? Slowly,
yeah, very carefully.
Wow.
A lot of digging, a lot of supplying him with air, and then luckily we were eventually able to get him out without causing harm to him or without having to literally dig and cut through things to get to him. But time.
I mean, this has got to be one of the situations where when you're in there, you're not moving.
Correct.
Like you're having a hard time breathing.
Yeah. Yeah, especially when you're dealing with compression on the stomach and the torso area. I mean, a lot of people don't really realize how much they use their stomach to breathe.
Oh, man.
And
when I was in that spot, I was like, dude, I'm like, this is kind of hard to breathe in here. Like, cause a normal breath is going to expand so much. And I couldn't even do that.
Yeah.
It was so weird. So it's like, but I've seen these like, you watch those shows where it's like horrifying moments or whatever. And somebody gets trapped in like a storm drain and they're like, I'm like this and you can't move and you can barely breathe because your body's not going to go. It's like whatever you got in your sternum or whatever, I don't even know what that is, but it's like, it's a really scary feeling.
I don't do well personally with not being able to move.
No,
as a victim in one of these situations, I'd probably just be unconscious the whole time.
That's So another question I have for and this is just like a random thing that I want to know. So like that brush fire right there, like let's say that the wind is blowing that way and the fire's going that way. Do you want to attack it from the back or from the front or from the side?
Loaded question. Getting into the tactics of it, I mean, the fastest way to get any fire out is to go directly to what we call the seat of the fire, which is the base, right? And you can kind of see where that is because there's a lot of orange right there. Yes, the wind is going to be pushing that a certain direction. So if possible, you want to try to hit it from that side. If the only thing you can do is come from the back side of it, the leeward side, then you need to just be very aggressive. And instead of taking the time to make sure it's completely out, just pushing really hard and then catching that on the back end.
So if it's not dangerous, you could like push into the fire, like the wind's coming this way, but I'm going to push it into it.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the one big thing that is different about a brush fire versus us going into like a building that's on fire is the respiratory protection. In that environment, you don't have the ability to breathe supplied air. And so you have to be very careful about the things that you're inhaling and what you're exposing yourself to.
Yeah.
It can be debilitating. And a lot of that smoke, I don't want to say it's not bad for you, but I mean, when grass is on fire, it's nowhere near as bad for you as when plastic is on fire. And you can safely expose yourself to a certain amount of that in a smart way, right? In a calculated manner.
Yeah.
But it's just a matter of trying to balance all those factors. So wind speed, the fuel itself that's on fire, what is at risk if I don't stop it here? Versus what if I just let it go over here and then attack it from a different angle?
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Which is how a lot of these incidents get so big, because they become so big and so dangerous that what they'll do is they'll go into a controlled area where the environment is much more safe, and they will burn back towards and actually start fires to get rid of fuel.
Yeah.
And do stuff like that. But on the small scale, I mean, you need to get to the seat of that thing as fast as possible.
Okay. Awesome. Confined space.
Yep. So what you're seeing there is what the guy that was on the end of that rope in the last picture is doing.
Okay.
Right. So he's, going through the tube, the tunnel, the whatever, all that stuff that's in front of him is his rescue equipment. He's got a harness for the victim. He's got a supplied air system that he can share with the victim if he needs to. He's got air monitoring equipment so that he can determine how safe the environment is. Because if it's super flammable, that changes things. If you've got hazards in the atmosphere that are not sustainable for human life, then that changes things.
Did the guy in the storm drain, did he go in head first?
He did.
Oof. That just made me think of that when I saw that.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
man, I bet that. How long was he in there?
Probably like a good 4.5 hours.
Man, I bet that was horrible.
Yeah. And what amazed me was how good of spirits he was in afterwards. And it wasn't just like gratefulness. He was just a happy guy. He wanted to take pictures with us and look at the truck. And I was like, all right, man. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So on the right there is us doing like a rope rescue off of a billboard.
This is more of that technical training. Mm-hmm. That's really cool.
So we've got a ladder truck there and a basic rope setup with a Stokes basket for us to put a victim in. And we're just in the process of doing that. So the technical rescues, a lot of it, I said, is very heavily rope based. And it's just learning how to build these systems and operate them. And for me, I've always found it oddly satisfying, kind of fun to be able to build a system from nothing. So whether it's in this type of setting, I've got to get up there and I have to devise a way to get somebody off of this.
Yeah.
I'm on top of Finger Rock and some guy fell off of it trying to climb without a belay. And now I have to figure out how I'm going to build a system that will allow me to safely go down, package this person up, get him into a situation where I can either put him in a helicopter or take him down off the mountain.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've had all sorts of weird calls over the years. I had to get a guy off of like a big oil tank, the tank farms. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but those large groups of giant tanks.
Just round tank in the middle of a field. Yeah.
Yeah. They hold the thousands of gallons of oil or gasoline or whatever. We had a guy up on top of one of those once that had a medical emergency, and then he ended up being unconscious. So I had to get him off of that.
Wow.
Yeah. I've always found that satisfying, just figuring out how to make that happen.
Yeah. There's something very rewarding about figuring out a problem. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and that hasn't been addressed. You know what I mean? That's, yeah definitely.
And it's different every time. Mm-hmm. So that's what has always drawn me towards this stuff.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah. Here's just some pictures of training, just some of the things that we have to do. A lot of, we just refer to them as towers, which is there's always some sort of a tower with a stairwell. Mm-hmm. And one of the biggest things that we do in the academy setting is get people used to working in their gear. So they have to put it all on, and then they go up and down that tower. Mm-hmm. And it's not easy. It gets very exhausting, but it also builds that stamina and that fortitude. And then on the left there, it's just, ladder operations. That's not a ladder truck in the sense of the ones that you see that have like a big platform on the end of them where you go on and you operate off of that. That's just more of what we would call a quint, which is kind of a small one that has an elevated nozzle that we can spray water from. Yeah.
How long are those usually? Like
anywhere between 75 and 100 feet.
Oh, that's pretty long
for the most part.
Okay. Yeah.
Again, going back to the technical side of things, I'm actually about to do this training again this coming week, but this is where we have to literally climb up to somebody so we don't have a safety line and then figure out how to save them from that scenario.
You're not using a safety line on this?
Nope.
Really?
Yeah, even in training.
Because I was going to ask, like, are you tying yourself off somewhere? Or?
So we use what we affectionately refer to as lobster claws, but what they are is they're basically just two really big carabiners.
Okay.
And as we climb, we hook them in and then we unhook them as we get higher and higher.
Sure.
But there's still a margin for error there because as you can see, those are diagonal. Mm-hmm. And if I were to fall, it's going to slide down until it catches.
Sure.
So you're still dealing with some risk there.
Yeah, you definitely will get hurt.
Yeah.
Hopefully not die.
Yeah. But you got to do that carrying a lot of stuff. I mean, you can see all the stuff that's clipped to that rescue there. And it gets heavy. I mean, you're dealing with a few 100 feet of rope. That rope is 1/2 inch in diameter. You've got 2 of them.
How high is that tower?
That one's about 6 stories. That person's probably about 50 feet off the ground where he's at.
How long does it take you to get to the top of that from the ground?
Oh, that's very person specific. But if you're doing it the safe way, I mean, it should take you at least 5 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, just taking your time and getting up there and making it happen.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, then developing a system to lower that victim to the ground because they're incapable of climbing at that point. So just figuring out how all that's going to work, putting it together. This isn't something that happens very commonly. And a lot of your larger agencies like the Tucson Electric Power Company as an example, they will do a lot of this on their own.
Okay.
And they will really specialize in taking care of their own before they ever even need us.
Interesting.
But it happens. I mean, it's not always power line workers, right? The last one of these that I had was a kid whose friends dared him to climb up to the top of that thing. I mean, that kid was probably 110 feet off the ground. And then
just didn't know how to get back.
Yeah, cat in a tree syndrome, right? Like there was no way he was coming back down. So
yeah, no.
Yeah. This is the wild setting, nature. We're out there and where I referenced like a hiker or a rock climber or something of that nature. Mm-hmm. This is actually our fire academy, and we do a baseline level of training with every academy. And so they're the ones in the red shirts and the orange helmets. And this is us going out there and literally going over some of the basic stuff we do. So any engine company, any entry-level position, any of that will be expected to hike up a trailhead if it's in their first due. Wow. So we have stations all along the foothills. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of hiking trails and places where people go. And so at any given point, you could be required to hike 3-4 miles up into the mountains and do this kind of stuff and get people out. So we give everybody a base level of training in the academy for it to help better prepare them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool.
That's a picture from when I was doing that stint as a contractor right after high school.
Is that you at the bottom right?
Yeah, it is.
Wow.
Yep, that was my
19-year-old Brian.
19-year-old Brian. That was the team of people that I worked with on that company that I was on. So we were a rescue company out of this specific location is very near what you hear referred to as the green zone in Baghdad.
You look super young there. It's not like that you look old, but you can just tell, like, you can tell pictures of people when they're young.
Oh, yeah. It was a different time. Yeah.
That's cool.
This was during my time when I was actually in the military, working for the Air Force as a CBRN specialist. What we call it emergency manager. And, this was my last deployment. So this really wasn't that long ago. I believe this was in 2020. And, I was in an undisclosed location. not doing anything cool, but just not able to talk.
Where are you at in this picture?
Let's see. I actually don't even remember. I think I'm on the bottom right there in the.
Okay. And you were in the Air Force for how long?
About 8 years.
But you weren't in firefighting in that position, right?
I was not. I did. So the technical job term was emergency manager, which is very similar to what it is in the civilian world, where we literally operate what we call an emergency operations center for anything that may happen.
Yeah.
And part of that is to coordinate a bunch of different specific job functions to mitigate whatever's happening. And there's up to 15 of them. So it could be anything in the military world, from a plane crash to an attack to whatever. The power went out, and so now we have to figure out how we're going to manage this, right? So this would be where you would go to manage that. That was what I did on a day-to-day basis. And then response-wise, I was responsible for hazmat, which means I worked with the fire department.
Did you like being in the Air Force?
I did. It was very different from my stint as a personal or a private contractor in the early 2000s. I didn't join the military until I was 30 years old. That probably had a lot to do with it too. Yeah. I mean, I learned a lot. I made a lot of connections and, again, had experiences that I never would have had otherwise.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah, so this is my family. That's my wife, Wynn, who's also been a guest of yours.
Yeah, she's the pediatrician.
Yeah, that's my daughter in the middle there, Ember. She is 2 years old. That's my son, Oliver, on the right there, and he is 5 years old. And he thinks being a firefighter is the coolest thing on earth.
I would imagine. So I wonder why.
Yeah, right. So he loves going to the station and putting on Dad's stuff, and
that's cool.
Hanging out. And,
does he talk about like I'm going to be a firefighter and all that stuff?
Oh yeah, he wants to know when he can be a cowboy and a firefighter, which is very fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are really good pictures, man.
Yeah. So I included this because it has nothing to do with firefighting, but it's a large part of what my life has been, which is growing up in a setting where you're working with animals in a ranching setting. Currently, I work as a hand for Page Land and Cattle for the Goslin Ranch out in Globe, Arizona. And what that means is a few times a year I'll go out for a roundup in the spring season and the fall season, and then intermittently peppered throughout the year just as work needs to get done. But we'll go and work cattle during that time. It's not the biggest operation. I think they currently probably have around 120 head.
Wow.
Yeah, but I do it with some guys that I work with at the fire department, and it's a family-owned ranch of one of them. And I grew up in the area, and it borders up with a ranch that my father worked when I was a kid.
That's cool.
Yeah, so it's kind of a neat connection that circles back around. It's one of those things where I'm not exactly making a lot of money, but just the satisfaction, the hard work, the ability to be able to take my son out here.
Yeah.
And just do
probably
these
amazing
things.
For him.
Yeah. It's just been a large part of who I am.
Yeah.
So,
that's cool.
Yeah. And then what you're seeing here is just one of the brandings. So the culmination of going through the season where, the cattle get pregnant, they give birth, and then you've got those calves, and it's getting those calves and castrating the males and vaccinating them and getting them ready to sell, to eat, essentially. And then the branding and all of that process. So
do they brand them when they're like newborns or?
Yeah. I mean, you can do it as early. We try not to do it when they're newborn, like within the last few weeks, but after that, it's fair game.
Okay.
Because they grow incredibly quickly. And so if you pass up on a season, I mean, if they get to be a year old, they get very big, and it gets very difficult to wrestle them down and get all this stuff, make it happen.
Yeah, that would make sense, because I was like, man, how are they holding? But it's a smaller one.
It's a smaller one. But I mean, you see there, some of them, like that one's probably a yearling, because you've got 4 people.
Yeah.
And those aren't small people. I mean, that's me on the far right there in the blue shirt. Yeah. And so you can see they're all probably bigger than me, and they're all just laying on this guy trying to keep him from moving there. Yeah. But it can be fun. It can be dangerous. I've seen a lot of people get hurt pretty bad over the years
or something.
Yeah, getting kicked, getting ran over. I mean, yes, 600, 700, 800-pound animal just isn't going to stop because you're in the way.
I think you got to grow up in that lifestyle to want to be like a bull rider. I've seen too many like bull rider crashes, and I'm like, dude, like that, you had to have grown up like that, and you're just destined for that because it's like, man.
Yeah, I am not a rodeo cowboy. I'm a ranch hand.
Yeah.
My roping skills involve that.
If I were ever going to be a bull rider, I would have to have one of those helmets with the mask on the front because, you know, too many people got their face smashed in from like being bucked and then like running right into the freaking head of the bull or whatever it is. You know what I mean? And it's like they started using those things for people who wanted to wear them. And if I were ever to do that, which I would never, but if I had to, I would have to have one of those.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's pretty funny. This last season, we were actually short-handed and we had a lot of work to do. And so I recruited, or I was trying to recruit some people from the gym, and I actually took Q out there, and I put him on. I put him on a horse, and we moved some cattle together. But while I was asking some people, I remember I had asked. I'm not going to name names, but I asked one person from the gym, and he was like, "Yeah, like I would love to go do that with you." He's like, "But I mean, like I would probably need to wear a helmet." And like do some things, and I just remember going, "You can't come, buddy. Sorry, you're not going to be okay."
That's funny.
Yeah, but yeah, it was just it's different. it's a different form of work. I'll put it that way. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, I've been a hunter my whole life. My father was big into hunting when I was a kid. I mean, doing the whole ranching thing and the just making the most out of nothing type thing, right? And it's always been a way to just get outside and be more in touch with nature, to bond with my family. And I've spent most of my life just hunting for food, right? I've never been a let's put something on the wall kind of guy, or like I'm only going to take the biggest animal. And now that I'm getting older and I have hunted most of my life, now I want to get my son involved in it and get him excited about it. And I thought, you know what, it'd be cool if I did have something on the wall.
Yeah.
I've got like little sets of antlers and things all over my garage, in the back of my truck, just in random places, right? But the last couple of years, I've really focused on trying to get something that was very neat and what I would consider like a trophy, something that guys want to look for. So I could put it on the wall and it's worked. My son has been so excited about it.
That's cool.
This was a mule deer hunt that I went on up in northern Arizona, north of the Grand Canyon, and just a big, beautiful animal.
Is this a bow or a rifle? Or?
This was a rifle.
Okay.
This was a very difficult shot. I mean, it was my final shot was a little over 700 yards. This is very far.
That's far.
It's not a very common thing. I took a few shots that I missed as far out as 1,000 yards because of just where we were and how difficult it was. Wow. But this was definitely worth it. Yeah, I've got another picture in here of a elk. And
how long did you stalk this one?
This guy took me all day. We found him at 5 o'clock in the morning as the sun came up, and I was not able to take him until the evening at about 5:30. And then we weren't able to get him out and packaged up and back to camp until around midnight.
Dang.
Yeah. That was a long day.
Worth it though.
Very worth it.
Yeah, looks like it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
You we've talked about, how physical fitness is very important for firefighting. And you've been in CrossFit now for how long?
Really just since the Open last year. So since February of 23.
How do you feel that has impacted your job?
I think it's been good. I don't necessarily know if it's changed my performance at work. I have always striven to be I've always tried to be very physically fit. That's taken a lot of different forms over the years, especially as I've developed passions and interests. Early in my career, I thought it was just about trying to get bigger because I wasn't very big, right? So I just lifted a lot of weights and ate a lot of food. Later, I realized, I need some cardiovascular ability. So I tried running. I had a heavy interest in my early 20s, MMA, back when MMA was, well, different than it is now.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I did some jujitsu training, and I did boxing, and I did a lot of wrestling. I wrestled in high school. Then I started doing a mix of all things. I actually had a very negative experience with CrossFit when I was at a work conference in LA back in, this had to be 14 years ago now. We dropped in a gym there because one of the guys was doing CrossFit, and we show up, and I was probably about 160 pounds at the time. And I was strong-ish for my size, but they were doing a workout that involved high rep movements of overhead work with a barbell, and the RX weight for men was like 185 pounds.
Oh, well, that's heavy.
Right. And they didn't really scale things back then. And so I remember being like, well, I can't do that. So I put like 95 pounds on the bar, and one of the coaches comes up to me and he's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, well, putting the weight on the bar. And he's like, you can't do that. What do you mean I can't do that? He's like, it's 185 pounds. And I was like, dude, look at me. Like, I can't do that. And he goes, then why are you here? And I was like, you're right. Why am I here? And I left.
That's crazy, man.
Yeah. And so I was like, I'm not like, that's what CrossFit is. Okay. Big ego. So I had zero interest in it for years and years. And everybody at work used to make fun of me. They said I did FrostFit because I essentially was doing CrossFit style working out. But I was just modifying it.
That is funny. I'm going to make you a t-shirt, man.
Right. And I was basically circuit training, incorporating barbell movements. It was a lot like CrossFit, but without Olympic lifting. I never really had a foundation in Olympic weightlifting.
Sure.
So it was, a lot of deadlifts and a lot of shoulder press and things like that, but squats, but mixed in. And then at work, I would do a lot of that while wearing all the stuff. And we would do things like tire flips and, dragging hose and all of these things that were task specific to our career field, but very similar. I didn't really start getting interested in CrossFit until I have a sister who's very interested in it, who I like to make fun of for being a member of the cult, right? Mm-hmm. And she said, you know what? Why don't you just try doing the open? And I said, sure, I'll do the open. I could do that. So I came and I called Megan over at Iron Grip there, and I wasn't a member. And I just said, hey, can I come do this? Sure, come on in. We'll take care of you. So I came in, and the first workout for that open was the one where it started with a bunch of calories on the rower, and then it was toes to bar, and then wall balls, cleans, and muscle ups. Oh, yeah. And I'd done some ring muscle ups when I was in my 20s because, guys at work, it was like a challenge who could do muscle ups. And I could do that. Never in my mind did I consider I had to get to that point in the workout. Yeah. So I blast through those calories like they're nothing. And I could see Megan looking at me like, oh, all right. And then I get over to the rig and I knock out like 5 toes to bar, and I'd never done them before, ever. And I was like, oh, that's easy. So I just kept going until I couldn't do it anymore. And I probably around 20, I broke. And I think what I had to do, you had 50 or something like that. And oh, man, I'm tired. And I tried to do another one, and I couldn't. That's funny. And I spent the next 10 minutes muscling my way through. I never finished the toes to bar. I got to like 48. And
that's a lot still, man.
And my hands were bleeding, and I was just a mess. And Megan was very nice and very encouraging. And she's like, oh, that's good. Like, there's not going to be that in the next workout. So like, maybe you'll do better at that one. And I'm just like, yeah, I will be better. So I came back the next week and I did the next workout. And one of them had double unders. And I'd never jumped rope at all, not even single unders. And I just failed horribly. I had bruises all over my legs from the rope. Yeah. And the end of this process, I realized, man, I'm really bad at this. And my whole life, I've not liked being bad at things. Yeah. So I said, you know what? I'm going to start doing this until I'm better at it.
That's cool.
And now I really enjoy it. I went through my level 1 and I do a bunch of different things. And now I'm not at that gym with you guys anymore, but the reason that I switched was really just for skill development. And where I went and where I'm at now, it's not really a CrossFit gym. They really just focus on the skills, which is kind of what I was looking for at the time. Sure. Right. And I mean, it's paid off. I can handstand walk across the gym now. Nice. I can do muscle ups all day long. all these things that I was so bad at before.
For sure.
But now my ego's satisfied, right? So now I can do these things. So it'll circle around. I still like the CrossFit mentality. I still love that gym. It still feels like home to me because it's where I started doing it.
Do you coach at the other gym you go to?
No, I don't really coach. Every once in a while they've asked me to just fill in, but I'm definitely not like on staff.
Yeah. That's cool that they focus on like, it's more like skill, like particular. So it's like you get more time at certain skills versus like it being spread out over time. Type thing.
They have a very, like, you know what you're getting. They don't post the workouts beforehand, but you know that Mondays is going to be some sort of lower body weightlifting. And then it's going to be a Metcon that has a lot of lower body in it. Tuesdays is very heavily gymnastics based, and it's a lot of skill development and targeted training. The Metcon is going to be a little bit less of a traditional Metcon and more skill based.
Okay.
Wednesdays is going to be Olympic lifting.
Hour classes still? Okay.
Yeah. Thursdays is always just open gym. It's like a day off. And Fridays is always back and upper body. So you're going to do deadlifts. The Metcon's going to have that. And then Saturdays is always partner workout based, and it's usually just something ridiculous and brutal that's going to take you an hour to do. It's a very long, sustained. Again, it's not very CrossFit. It's more just like a long, grueling type thing.
I like those ones the best. Like just kind of grunt work type stuff. Yeah. Like with, tire flips, dragging hoses and stuff like that. It's like everybody can do that. You know what I mean? But just do it for a long period of time and wear yourself out. Yeah. So like looking back over your career, like, do you have any regrets? Like something that stands out, like, I should have done this, or I shouldn't have done that.
Man, I'd probably have to think about that one. All the things that have happened in my career that might be considered regrets also had the positives, right? Like we talked about, in all honesty, what a poor decision it probably was in reality for me to take that position as a private contractor at 19 years old. But it had so many positives too, like coming home at a young age and being forced into adulthood and just having a perspective on geopolitics and the reality of living in third world countries. And then I come home and, my 19-year-old girlfriend is complaining about how her friend was texting some guy or talking to some guy, right? Like
you're like,
didn't really care about things like that anymore, right? I don't know. That's tough for me to say regret. Are there things that I wish I would have focused on more? Probably.
Such as?
I have avoided the prevention side of things most of my career, and only now am I going through a lot of that training. So code enforcement, code development, arson investigation, things like that. I have spent most of my career avoiding any type of administrative duty other than training. I've done so many different jobs. I mean, I started as a firefighter. I worked as a paramedic on the ambulance for a few years. I became an engineer. I drove the truck for a while. I went to work as a captain. While as a captain, I had several different assignments, including ladder truck captain, doing all these things, but they were all operational, focusing on the technical rescue, doing hazmat. I got into teaching academies for a while. I was a lead, what we call RTO, recruit training officer. I helped go around to different operations. The specific department that I work for is private, and we have operations all over the country. They flew me around to set up technical rescue teams all over the place, to do all this stuff. I've even worked myself into a position now where I coordinate all the rope rescue training for every department of Southern Arizona. But I did all that at the expense of some other things.
Sure.
Which didn't really, I want to say, make me as well-rounded as I probably could have been.
Sure.
And kind of everybody has different mentalities. But for the most part, you will find it takes two very different people that work for the fire service to do operations versus administrative stuff. And one doesn't really gravitate towards the other. But the people in operations historically always look at administrative jobs as a backup.
Okay.
Like if something happens to me and I can no longer do this, I've got that. But because I have not spent a lot of time focusing on that, I don't really have that as a backup anymore.
Yeah.
So the last few years, I've been making an effort to further my education and hone in some of that training because I'm also in the position that I'm in responsible for a lot of stuff. And I have always been a firm believer in, you know, you need to have a well-rounded knowledge base to be somebody that's respected. To be a good leader, you have to, you know, be somebody that can lead, and you can't do that without experience in all things.
Yeah.
So we've all got something to learn. I've always been a firm believer of that. I mean, 10,000 hours or not, in my mind, you're never an expert.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's definitely something that I would consider, maybe not necessarily a regret, but something that I wish I would have spent more time on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So I have a random question. Fire hydrants. I don't know anything about them, but that's been a big topic out in California right now.
Yeah.
A hydrant running out of water. See, I was always under the impression that like the hydrants were hooked up to like water systems. Like, is that typical? Is it not? It's just a question for my own information, and if anybody else is interested to know.
Yeah. You've got a lot of different sources of water for hydrants. Primarily, they're hooked up to the same system as the houses or the area that they're in.
Okay.
So the hydrant that you have on your street outside is literally hooked into the same water supply as your house, which here, it's a pretty fairly good-sized grid system, and it all goes back to Tucson Water, and they have several aquifers around town that hold large amounts of water that kind of separate that. They're not going to run out for anything that's going to happen around here.
Okay.
Now, if something catastrophic happened at one of those pumping stations, they could not be supplied anymore. Now, in a large system, they can make up for that with other parts of the system. But what you get in a lot of outlying areas or like the foothills is it's kind of at the end of that grid system. And so it gets supplemented by tanks, gravity-fed systems, things like that. If you are in a part of town where you don't have a strong supply system because of the grid, the building codes will actually make you install your own water tanks and your own supply systems.
Wow.
Yeah. In some parts where you're actually far enough away that you're not even connected to the grid at all, then it's well-based. And those types of systems can very easily run out of water. Yeah, if they get stressed enough, it doesn't take much. A lot of that, you know, it's especially in the Midwest, right? Like you see those giant water towers.
Yeah,
and it's just, the water gets pumped up there and it sits there and then it gravity feeds the system. If that gets depleted for some reason, it takes time to recharge that. So yes and no.
It kind of varies.
It varies depending on the situation. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it can happen. You can hook up to a fire hydrant and there not be water.
Wow.
That picture earlier of the two very large smoke columns where I described it being behind the Triple T, that is in a very small part of town, which is in the middle of town, Valencia and Alvernon, Valencia and Swan. It's on a private water system.
Wow.
And we did not have very good water pressure for that fire.
Wow.
We actually had to up the pressure. We had to call the water department and say, hey, we need you to boost the pressure on the street because it's garbage. I'm not getting anything out of these hydrants.
Do the trucks, like big trucks, do they have like water tanks on them for like small fires?
They do, yeah. Each truck, it's pretty typical for a truck to carry between 500 and 1,000 gallons.
And is that to like get it started while somebody's hooking up to a hydrant or something like that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, with 1,000 gallons, you should be able to knock down any small fire. That's a lot of water.
Okay.
If there was a fire in your house, in your kitchen, 1,000 gallons should be able to easily put that out.
Okay.
Now, if your whole house catches fire, not so much. But yeah, so that's just for speed. A lot of what we do, again, life safety based. We don't always have hydrants. There's fires all the time in areas without hydrants. And so we need a way to get that going on the front end.
Okay.
If I have to enter a house in a hurry because there's potentially somebody inside that needs help, I can't really be doing that without a way to protect myself. And I have to do that with water. So
interesting. Yeah, it's all these like little things that you never think about, you know? So last question, like somebody wants to be a firefighter and they're looking to you, like what would be some advice that you would say to that person?
Apply often. Apply as much as you can, even if it's at a place that you really don't even have that much interest in working at.
Mm-hmm.
When I was applying around to all the different departments, I realized in researching and doing my homework for these interviews that some of these places I was applying weren't really places I wanted to be, but I still went because I wanted that practice and that experience.
Yeah. Practice and experience in the interviews?
In the interviews.
Okay.
Yeah. Educate yourself, not just literally, but again, like I just referenced, learn about the places that you want to work, learn specifics about the departments, learn what type of services they provide and what they are looking for in an employee, and then literally educate yourself. To promote it all, you do have to start getting formal education.
Okay.
Like for the position I'm at, you have to have at least an undergrad degree. You have to have all kinds of classes and certifications and so on, things that you can't even acquire till you've already been hired.
Okay.
But setting yourself up on the front end relieves so much stress and tension on the back end.
Nice.
And then the physical demand. If you have any way at all to volunteer or go through a program, like through a community college that will allow you to experience it, get the gear on, work in it. There's a pretty big difference between working for a few hours, wearing 100 pounds of stuff, and going to the gym and killing yourself for 30 minutes, an hour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, I really appreciate you being here. It was really cool. I loved hearing about all of that. And yeah, just thanks for coming.
Yeah. Thank you. Glad to be here.
If anybody else, if you're considering being a firefighter, what do you think? What did you think of Brian's career path and his experiences? Let me know in the comments, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thanks.